The call came at 6:47 in the morning, 3 minutes before Nora's alarm was set to go off, which meant she'd been lying awake for the better part of an hour already, running numbers that never came out right. $83.41 in her checking account. She knew it to the cent because she'd checked the ATM the night before, standing in the parking lot of the Crossroads Diner after her shift, the screen light harsh against the cold October air, and the number had been specific enough to memorize whether she wanted to or not. $83.41 between her and an account that would decline the next time it was asked to do something. By the end of this story, I'm also going to share something special with those of you who stick around to the end, something that can help you in your personal life. But first, let's get back to. The rent was $795 a month. She was 6 weeks behind, which meant she owed the building $1,193, plus the $100 late fee that Karen in the leasing office had started charging in September when she decided Nora was the kind of tenant who required incentives. The electricity was current by 4 days. The car needed a belt replaced, and the mechanic on Admiral had quoted $340, which might as well have been $3,400 for all the difference it made to her right now. He'd shrugged when she said she couldn't do it this week, shrugged the way mechanics shrugged when a woman came in alone and then left without paying for the repair, as if her situation was a comment on her character and not a comment on her bank balance. Lily's inhaler refill was sitting at the pharmacy 2 blocks east on Denver Avenue. $180.42. She'd called to ask if they could split the cost across 2 pickups, and the pharmacist had said, gently, in the voice of someone who delivered this particular news multiple times a day, that inhalers didn't work that way. You paid the full amount, or you picked it up when you could. She could not. Lily was asleep in the other room, which was technically the same room because the apartment was a studio on the south side of Tulsa, one large space with a half-wall divider Nora had found at a garage sale and positioned to give her daughter the equivalent of a bedroom. The divider was painted yellow because Lily had asked for yellow, and yellow it was. The sound of Lily's breathing came through the thin drywall, slow and even, the specific quality of breathing that belonged to children who had not yet learned to carry anything into their sleep. Nora had stopped sleeping like that around the time Marcus left, 3 years ago now. Before that, if she was being honest, the signs had been present, and she'd been choosing not to read them the way you chose not to read certain things when reading them required action you weren't ready for. She was a competent person. She had been competent her entire life. Competence did not protect you from the things that happened anyway. It just meant you managed the aftermath alone, without the latitude for falling apart that was available to people who had someone to catch them. She worked 4 shifts a week at the Crossroads Diner, Tuesday through Friday, double shifts on Wednesday and Thursday. In April, she'd had 7 shifts a week, and then the spring had been slow and Dale had cut hours and the hours had not entirely returned. She'd asked twice. He'd said soon. It was October, and soon had not arrived. She picked up delivery gigs when the car cooperated. She did not advertise this to Dale because Dale's opinion of drivers who worked for other platforms on their off days was something she'd heard him express at length and preferred not to have directed at her. The car cooperated less and less since August. The phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. Kansas area code. She answered on the second ring because she always answered unknown numbers now. Since Lily's asthma diagnosis in January, she answered everything. Lily's school called from numbers that weren't saved. The pharmacy called. The pediatric specialist called. You answered. Miss Callahan. The voice was male, mid-60s at least, with the careful enunciation of someone accustomed to making sure what he said was understood the first time. My name is Robert Deerfield. I'm an attorney with Deerfield and Associates in Griggsville, Kansas. I apologize for the early hour. I've been trying to reach you for the past 5 days. She sat up. The ceiling above her had a water stain that had been there since she moved in, an irregular brown shape she'd stared at enough nights to know well. It looked like a question mark, depending on the angle. What is this about? Your great-uncle, Mr. Harlan Stokes. He passed away 12 days ago. I'm handling his estate. The name arrived slowly. Harlan. She'd heard it perhaps a dozen times in her life. Always from her mother. And almost always in the particular tone her mother reserved for people who had made inconvenient choices and were best understood at a distance. I didn't know he was sick. He'd been declining for some time, Deerfield said. He was 87. He passed at home, which was what he wanted. His voice was measured with the specific care of a professional who had delivered this kind of news thousands of times and had found the register that was neither cold nor falsely warm. "I'm sorry, Miss Callahan. The reason I'm calling is that Mr. Stokes named you as his sole beneficiary. He left you the entirety of his estate." She stood up without deciding to. Her feet found the cold floor of the kitchen tiles. Through the half-wall divider, Lily's breathing continued its slow rhythm. "Could you say that again?" "You are the sole beneficiary of Harlan Stokes' will. That includes 40 acres of agricultural land outside of Griggsville, the farmhouse on the property, and all structures thereon. There are 2 grain silos on the parcel. Both are listed in the estate documents." Nora pressed her free hand flat against the kitchen counter. The laminate was cold and solid. "He barely knew me." Deerfield paused. "He knew more about you than you might expect. He was specific when we drafted the will 3 years ago. He said you asked the right questions." "What does that mean?" "I'm not entirely sure, Miss Callahan. He wasn't a man who elaborated. But the will is properly executed and the language is unambiguous. You're the legal owner of the Stokes property upon completion of the estate filing, which I expect to finalize within the week. I'd like you to come to Griggsville as soon as possible to sign the transfer documents and take possession." She looked at the kitchen table. The bills were stacked there, organized by due date because organizing things she couldn't pay felt like the minimum available gesture. Rent, electric. The car diagnostic sheet had done in August and still hadn't fully settled. "What's the property worth?" Another pause, shorter, with a different quality. Deerfield was choosing words. "Agricultural land in that county currently runs between $700 and $800 per acre at market rate. The farmhouse sustained storm damage for years ago. Part of the roof over the rear addition needs significant work. The 2 silos are structurally sound as far as we can determine, though I should be clear with you. The larger of the 2 silos, what we're calling the North Silo, has been sealed since 1971. We have no current documentation on what, if anything, is inside it." Nora did the math without pause. 40 acres at $750. $30,000, roughly. Minus attorney fees, transfer costs, the outstanding property tax Deerfield would probably tell her about shortly, the drive to Kansas and back, the time off work that Dale would either allow or not depending on his mood. She thought about the inhaler at the pharmacy, the belt in the car, the late fee that grew by $25 each additional week. "I'll come," she said. "What day works?" Deerfield named a date 3 days out. He said he had transfer documents for her signature, keys for the property, and 1 additional item, a letter that Harlan Stokes had prepared for her personally, sealed, to be opened at the property. His specific instruction, Deerfield said. He was clear about it. He wanted you to read it there, not in my office. "Did he say which part of the property?" "He said you'd know when you got there." After she hung up, Nora stood in the kitchen and listened to the city starting its day below the window. A delivery truck. Someone's dog. The particular sound of a neighborhood that had never been quiet and never would be. She thought about the one time she'd met Harlan Stokes. Her grandfather's funeral, 11 years ago, when she'd been 23 and newly uncertain in ways she hadn't yet understood, standing in the fellowship hall of a Methodist church in Liberal, Kansas, eating a piece of dry coffee cake, because grief did strange things to her appetite, and she'd learned that eating something mechanical gave her hands a task. Harlan had been standing near the window at the back of the hall, away from the cluster of family near the coffee urns, watching the parking lot through the glass with the focused attention of someone cataloging what they observed. He was tall, even at 76, lean in the way that outdoor work created over decades, with hands shaped by tools and weather into something more permanent than skin. He wore a suit that was too broad in the shoulders, the kind you bought once for funerals and wore whenever the occasion arose regardless of fit. She'd walked over because she was genuinely bad at small talk, and he looked like someone else who was bad at small talk, and she'd asked what he was looking at. "The way the light changes," he'd said. "This time of day, this time of year, it goes gold for about 4 minutes before it goes flat. Most people miss it." They'd stood together without speaking, watching the parking lot, until the light went flat and ordinary. Then Harlan had nodded once at her, the way you nodded at someone who'd passed an assessment they hadn't known was happening, and gone to get more coffee. She'd never spoken to him again. Her mother Marlene had said on the drive home that Harlan was strange and had always been strange, that he'd sat on that farm for 60 years and kept to himself and never reached out to anyone, never offered assistance, never called. That there was something off about a man who chose that kind of solitude. Now Nora owned the farm. She woke Lily at 7. Her daughter was 7 3/4, which she considered a meaningful distinction from merely 7. She had her father's dark hair and Nora's stubbornness, and a combination of the two that made her simultaneously uncomplicated and demanding to raise. She kept a field notebook, a green spiral-bound thing with a hard cover that she'd been filling since she was 5, documenting what she observed with the seriousness of a researcher who hadn't yet been informed that research required credentials. She drew birds and cloud formations and the architectural details of buildings she passed. She cataloged the number of red vehicles that drove past their building on a given afternoon. She wrote the names of every plant she could identify and left space beneath each entry for additional notes as her understanding developed. Nora had never been able to account for this. It hadn't come from her, and it hadn't come from Marcus, and it was entirely Lily's own. "We're taking a trip," Nora said from the doorway. Lily's eyes opened immediately, fully awake in the way children were when they hadn't yet learned the habit of resisting consciousness. "Where?" "Kansas. We inherited some land from your great-great-uncle Harlan." Lily sat up. "We have land. 40 acres. A farmhouse and 2 silos." "What's a silo?" "A large cylinder for storing grain." Lily reached for her field notebook from the nightstand and drew something in it before she did anything else. A rough, quick sketch of something rounded and tall. Then she looked up. "Is it an adventure?" Nora thought about the $83. 41. About the envelope Deerfield was holding for her that she couldn't read until she got there. About the north silo nobody had opened since 1971. "Yeah," she said. "It's an adventure." She called Marlene that evening, which was a decision she'd been circling since morning. Her mother would find out regardless. Better it came from Nora. Marlene answered on the first ring, the particular alertness of a woman who'd been expecting the other shoe for the past decade. "Harlan Stokes died," Nora said. "He left me the farm." Silence. Then the sound of her mother reordering something. "Why would he do that?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement of confusion in question form. "I don't know. He left me a letter, but I can't read it until I go out there." "Go out there." Marlene's voice sharpened. "Nora, that land has been sitting fallow for 15 years. Your grandfather told me Harlan let it go after he got too old to work it, and then refused to sell it and refused to rent it properly, and just sat there with it going to nothing. Which is exactly like him. He never needed money the way ordinary people need money, so he never thought about what money meant to someone who did. The land might be worth $30,000. It might be worth 22 after the attorney and the back taxes and the gas to drive to Kansas in a car with a cracked windshield," Marlene said. "And before you celebrate $30,000, understand that $30,000 on a property in that condition in a county that hasn't moved farmland above 800 an acre in years is the number if everything goes right. The realistic number is 18, possibly less. There's a silo that's been sealed since 1971. Nobody's opened it." "A grain silo," Marlene said. "Yes." Nora. The patient voice. The voice her mother used when she was managing an impulse to say something sharper. Whatever Harlan locked up in that silo he locked up because he didn't want to deal with it. That man never dealt with anything in his life. He sat there alone on that property for 60 years avoiding everything, and now he's handing his avoidance to you as an inheritance. Which is honestly the most Harlan thing I've ever heard. Nora was quiet. "I know you need money," Marlene said. "I know things are difficult. But driving across 3 states for a maybe is not the same as having a plan." Nora thanked her mother and hung up and went to the diner early the next morning to talk to Dale in person. Dale was in the back restocking the reach-in cooler, and he turned when she came in with the expression of a man who'd been calculating the probability of this conversation and had arrived at a number he wasn't happy with. "I need 3 days," Nora said. "Family situation. Who covers your Tuesday?" "I'll be back Wednesday morning. I can run a double if you need it. If Kendra covers Tuesday, she keeps those tips. I'm not splitting a shift she worked." "Fine." Dale looked at her for a moment with the assessment of a man weighing inconvenience against the cost of losing someone reliable. 3 days, he said. "Wednesday morning, or I give your Thursday to Kendra too. We clear?" "We're clear." Bet was in the parking lot when Nora got home, loading groceries from her trunk in the slow, methodical way of someone who had nowhere else to be. Bet was 62 and had lived in the building since 1998 and had accumulated, through no apparent effort, a comprehensive understanding of every resident's schedule, finances, and general trajectory. She looked at the sleeping bag visible through the rear window of Nora's Civic and said, "Where are you going?" "Kansas. My great-uncle died and left me a farm." Bet closed the trunk. "What county?" "Finney." She was quiet for a moment with the quality of someone running calculations they hadn't been asked to share. "Agricultural land in that part of Kansas," Bet said, "is running around $750 an acre for dryland fields. Maybe $800 if the soil's good. 40 acres puts you at $30,000 to $32,000, tops, before any fees." "I know. Is the house livable?" "Partly." Bet looked at her. The look was not unkind. It was the look of someone who cared enough to be honest about a thing, even when honesty was uncomfortable to deliver. "Honey, sometimes what people leave you is the thing they couldn't figure out what to do with. Not because they wanted to help you, but because they ran out of time and you were the one still around. That's not an inheritance. That's a problem with your name on it." "I'll be back Wednesday," Nora said. She packed that night with Lily helping, which meant Lily made specific requests about what went into her backpack and supervised the rest with the air of someone managing a complex operation. The field notebook went in first. 2 changes of clothes, Mr. Harold the battered stuffed rabbit, the small binoculars she'd been given for her birthday, and a thermos she insisted on filling herself with apple juice because she'd decided travel required juice. Nora packed practical things. 1 bag for herself, the camp stove and 2 pots and a box of matches. Sleeping bags rated to 40 degrees. A flashlight and extra batteries. Sandwiches and apples and a cooler with ice. A toolbox from the back of the closet with a hammer and 2 screwdrivers and a pry bar she'd bought when the landlord had been slow to fix a stuck window and she'd decided to fix it herself. A can of WD-40. She looked at the toolbox for a moment after she closed it. A rusted padlock that hadn't been opened since 1971. She put the WD-40 on top, where she could reach it easily. They left at 5:30 the next morning, before the city was fully awake. Lily had her face at the window before they'd cleared the parking lot. Field notebook open on her lap, pen moving. The Oklahoma flatlands stretched and went gray and then gold as the sun came up behind them, and by the time they crossed into Kansas, the sky had become something else. The sky in flat country was different from the sky anywhere else. There was more of it. The horizon pulled back in every direction until the sky occupied more of your field of vision than the earth beneath it, and your brain processed the surplus as a different quality of space, something closer to openness than size. Lily pressed her face against the glass and said, "The sky is bigger here." Nora said, "It's the same sky. It doesn't look the same. More of it's visible. Your brain processes more sky as bigger sky." Lily wrote that down in the field notebook. The conversation happened in intervals through the morning. Lily had questions about grain storage, about silos specifically, about whether grain sealed in an airtight environment would still be grain after 50 years or would have changed into something else through some process she didn't have a name for yet. Nora answered what she could and said, "I don't know," to the rest, which Lily received without frustration because she had understood very early that "I don't know" was the beginning of something rather than its end. They stopped in Liberal for gas. Liberal was where her grandfather had been buried, where she'd met Harlan in the Methodist Fellowship Hall, where the light had gone gold in the parking lot, and then flat. She filled the tank and bought Lily a bottle of water and stood at the pump looking at the western sky for a moment, thinking about a 76-year-old man watching the same light in a different parking lot and saying, "Most people miss it." She had never missed it. Back on the road, Lily fell asleep past Garden City, the field notebook still open on her lap, pen still in her hand. Nora drove through the afternoon while the radio found stations and lost them. She thought about the envelope in her jacket pocket. Deerfield had been clear about the instruction. Harlan wanted her to read it at the property. Not in the office. Not on the road. Whatever he'd written required place. Griggsville announced itself with a water tower painted silver, then a grain elevator twice as tall as anything else on the skyline, then a Main Street 6 blocks long lined with buildings constructed for a population that had since decreased and adjusted accordingly. A gas station. A farm supply. A diner called Marge's with a hand-lettered sign advertising the Thursday special. A bank with its hours posted on a door that hadn't been repainted in a decade. A post office. A pharmacy. A bar called the Plum Line at the far end. Population 1,847, said the highway sign. Home of the Griggsville Falcons. The mural on the side of the pharmacy showed a wheat field at sunset. Painted sometime in the 90s by the look of it. The color's still good. The image communicating a pride in something that was still present even if the conditions for it had changed. Deerfield's office was above the pharmacy. A door at street level with a frosted glass panel. A staircase that smelled of old wood and the accumulated permanence of an office that had been in the same rooms for 30 years. Deerfield himself was lean and alert in his late 60s, wire-rimmed glasses, a cardigan over a button-down shirt, with the manner of a man who had spent his career making complicated things clear to people who were in no condition to receive complexity gracefully. He poured coffee from a percolator without asking whether they wanted it, set a cup in front of Lily, and said he had tea if she'd prefer. Lily said the coffee was fine. She was 7. Deerfield glanced at Nora and allowed himself a small smile. Lily settled with her field notebook and drew the office in quick ballpoint strokes. The bookshelves, the stacked files, the windows facing the street. Deerfield looked at her sketch once and said quietly that she had a good sense of proportion. Lily said she'd been working on it. The paperwork took 50 minutes. Transfer of title, deed recording procedures, the property tax structure, and what Nora would owe by the end of the fiscal year. The outstanding balance was $1,440. She noted it, kept her expression neutral, moved to the next document. Deerfield went through each page at a pace that was thorough rather than rushed, pausing for questions, answering the ones she had. At the end, he slid a key ring across the desk. 5 keys, each tagged in Harlan's cramped handwriting. Front door, back door, workshop, tool shed, north silo door. She picked up the ring. The north silo key was darker than the others, the head shaped differently, the weight of it slightly heavier in her hand. That key should work on the padlock, Deerfield said, watching her look at it. Though I want to be honest with you, that padlock has been in place since the early 70s. Whether the mechanism is still functional after 50-plus years of weather, I genuinely don't know. Harlan arranged basic maintenance for the property, foundation checks, roof sealing, rodent prevention. But the north silo was specifically excluded from any maintenance access. His management agreement with the property company was explicit on that point. Nobody was to open or inspect that structure, not even for safety assessments. Not even. He was very firm. Nora set the key ring beside her on the desk. Before we finish, Deerfield said, I want to mention that a developer named Cole Aldrich has been in contact about the property. He's aware of the estate transfer. He asked me to convey his interest in a purchase. What's he offering? $95,000, as is. She kept her face still. 3 times the land value. He represents an agricultural consolidation firm, Deerfield continued. They acquire small parcels and aggregate them into larger operations. His stated rationale is the water rights attached to the Stokes parcel. Your great-uncle's property has a registered well and creek access rights that have become increasingly valuable in this region over the past several years. His stated rationale. She noticed the words she'd chosen. So did Deerfield. I'm not in a position to speculate beyond what he's told me. But you don't need to make any decision on his offer right now. The estate is yours. You have time to think. He reached into his drawer and produced the envelope. Sealed with white wax, Harlan's initials stamped into the surface. Her name on the front in his cramped script. Below it, in capital letters clearly intended to be noticed, open at the property. His specific instruction, Deerfield said. He asked that you read it there. He said you'd know when you got there. She put the envelope in her jacket's inner pocket. She could feel it there, light and thin, as she and Lily walked back down the pharmacy stairs into the early evening air. They drove to the property as the light began to go flat, the sky still wide and pale above the flat Kansas land. The county road turning to gravel at the mile marker Deerfield had marked on his hand-drawn directions. The drive itself was packed dirt bordered by the thorny scrub that established itself in this region when agricultural land was left alone long enough. The land announced itself as they came over a gentle rise. 40 acres of it, the soil dark and stubbled with remnant growth, the field going bronze in the fading afternoon light. It was not the depleted, exhausted land Marlene had described. It was land that was waiting. Nora had been around enough neglect in her life. Enough people who hadn't cared for things to know the difference between something let go and something set aside on purpose. Lily pressed her face to the window. The ground is darker than I thought it would be. Good topsoil, Nora said. That dark color is organic matter. Lily wrote that down. The farmhouse sat at the end of the drive, a 1940s structure with a wide front porch and clapboard siding the color of old paper, the paint long faded from whatever white it had originally been. The roof was intact over most of the house. Over the rear section, where a back porch had been closed in at some point with a frame addition, the roofline sagged. One corner had partially folded inward, the rafters giving out to the patient work of time and water. A cottonwood tree had grown too close to the east wall, its branches pressing against the siding. The front windows were intact. The porch boards looked soft, but hadn't given out. Whatever basic maintenance Harlan had paid for had kept the structure from crossing the line between neglected and lost. Lily got out of the car and stood in the drive and looked at the house with the expression she used when she was deciding how something fit into her understanding of things. It's not abandoned, she said. No, abandoned things feel different. This feels like it's been waiting. Nora looked at her daughter. Yeah, she said. That's what it feels like. The silos were behind the farmhouse and slightly north, visible from the drive, but fully revealed only when you rounded the east corner of the house and came into the working yard behind it. The smaller silos stood to the west, aluminum, 60 feet tall, standard in every way, the kind of structure built on farms across this region for decades, and so familiar it nearly disappeared into the landscape. The north silo stopped her where she stood. She had seen photographs of it in the documents Deerfield had shown her, and the photographs had not prepared her for the scale. 90 feet, maybe taller. The circumference of it wider than she'd estimated. Concrete base, corrugated steel above, the entire structure rust-red with the particular depth of oxidation that came not from a season or two of weather but from decades. The rust so complete and so layered it had become a surface in itself, almost textural, the way very old things developed properties that hadn't been in them when they were new. The access door was on the south face. Heavy steel, hinged, with a padlock she could see clearly from 40 feet away. The size of the padlock was disproportionate even for a structure this large. Whoever had locked it had wanted it locked in a way that outlasted ordinary time. Lily came to stand beside her. How tall is it? 90 feet, maybe. What's inside? Nobody knows. Lily was quiet for a moment. She opened the field notebook. She wrote something, then sketched the silo in quick ballpoint strokes, adding a note below the sketch. If something was sealed inside a container that big, she said finally, in this climate, it would stay very dry, very low humidity. Things would be preserved. Nora looked at her daughter. What kind of things are you thinking about? I don't know yet. Lily looked up at the silo with the focused squint she used when she was still categorizing something. I was just thinking that if you wanted to keep something safe for a long time, this would be a good way to do it. They went inside the farmhouse. The air smelled of dry wood and dust, and something faintly underneath it, floral, a scent old enough to have become part of the structure itself, lavender perhaps, or something else brought into this house regularly for long enough to have settled into the plaster. The furniture was under white sheets. Nora uncovered the couch and chairs in the main room and pushed them back to give them space. The floors were wide pine boards, well fitted, the kind that hadn't been manufactured this way in a long time. In the bedroom, beside the window that faced the east, a series of pencil marks ran up the wall. Height marks, the way families tracked children, except done directly on the plaster rather than a doorframe. Dates in a small, careful hand above each mark. A name, Clara. The dates began in 1942 and ran to 1956, when Clara had been marked at 5 feet 6. Clara, Nora said, half to herself. Lily came to look. She ran her fingertip just above the pencil line at her own eye level, careful not to press. She was exactly my height in 1952. Lily looked at the name at the top of the series. Was she Harlan's sister? How did you know that? The last name on that letter you were given was Stokes, same as Harlan. And she stopped getting taller in 1956, which means she either stopped living here or stopped being measured, and there's only one set of marks, which means she was the only child. Lily paused. I think she probably died young. Yes, I think she did. Lily wrote something in the notebook. They ate their sandwiches at the kitchen table with a flashlight between them. Lily asked questions about grain silos through the meal, 22 questions by Nora's count, and Nora answered what she could and said I don't know to the rest. Before we find out what happened next in the story, I want to take a brief moment to speak directly to anyone watching who might be going through their own sudden, overwhelming transition. If you are navigating a bitter divorce, the loss of a spouse, or a financial shock, you know the hardest part isn't just the money. It's not knowing what to do first. That is exactly why we created the Phoenix Blueprint. It is a practical, step-by-step guide for starting over. It doesn't have fluffy affirmations or vision boards. It is a tactical survival manual. It gives you the exact checklist for the first 48 hours, including the one rule you must follow. Do not make any decision you cannot reverse. It includes the Found Money worksheet, showing you exactly how to check state databases because 1 in 7 Americans actually has unclaimed money waiting for them right now. It even gives you word-for-word boundary scripts to use when family members pressure you for money or try to make decisions for you. You can get the entire guide right now for just $17. If you're watching on your TV, just pull out your phone, open your camera, and scan the QR code on the screen right now. If you're on a computer or phone, click the top link in the description. You don't have to figure this out alone. Now, let's get back to the story. The night settled over the property with the quiet of places that had not had voices in them for a long time. Wind moved through the cottonwood on the east side, a low continuous sound, less a sound than a pressure. Lily fell asleep in her sleeping bag on the cushions they'd arranged on the living room floor, Mr. Harold under her arm. The field notebook finally closed beside her. Nora lay still. The envelope was on the kitchen table. She could feel its presence the way she could feel the north silo outside in the dark, sealed and massive, waiting on its own terms. Harlan's letter. His instruction had been to read it at the property. She was at the property. But something about the farmhouse at night felt wrong for it, felt like the wrong quality of light for what she suspected was inside. She lay awake until the window began to go from black to the deep purple gray that came before actual dawn in flat country, where there was nothing between you and the horizon to slow the light down. She made coffee on the camp stove, standing at the kitchen counter in the near dark, watching the window. The sky went from purple to gray to pale clear blue. Then the sun came over the eastern horizon, and the light came through the east-facing kitchen window and hit the pine floorboards. It went gold. The specific gold of that hour, that angle, that season. The color of old photographs. The color of the parking lot in Liberal 11 years ago when she'd stood beside a man she barely knew and watched the light change without saying a word. The floor of the farmhouse kitchen turned that color and held it for 4 minutes before the sun climbed and the moment passed. She sat down at the table. She picked up the envelope. The wax seal broke cleanly. 2 sheets of paper, Harlan's fountain pen, the handwriting cramped and deliberate, slightly less certain near the bottom of the second page where the ink had run dry and the pen had needed more pressure to leave marks. Nora, you watched the light with me in that parking lot in Liberal. You were the only person at that funeral who stopped what they were doing long enough to notice something real. I've been watching you since then. I know how that sounds. It's not what it sounds like. It's the way you pay attention to someone who reminds you of someone you lost. You remind me of Clara, not in your appearance, in the way you move through a room. You notice what other people walk past. She would have been glad to know you. I'm sorry she didn't get to. She died in March of 1971, on a Wednesday morning, in the kitchen of this house, in the middle of making breakfast, and I found her when I came in from the north field. She was 36 years old. The doctors said her heart had a defect from birth that had waited. After Clara died, I sealed the north silo. I'm not going to explain why in this letter. What I can tell you is that what's in the silo and why I sealed it are the same answer. They're not two separate things. Walk to the north silo. Go around to the north wall. Somewhere around 4 feet off the ground, you're going to find something Clara left there. She put it there in the autumn of 1970, 6 months before she died, because she wanted a marker. She told me about it after she did it. She said, if anything happens to me, at least somebody will know where to look. I never looked. I was too afraid of what finding it would require me to do. 50 years is enough time to talk yourself into almost anything, and I talked myself into being a man who sat on what he had and never moved. I called it protecting it. It wasn't protection. It was fear. I'm leaving this to you because you'll act when you find something. You'll look, and then you'll figure out what the looking means, and then you'll decide what to do next. That's more than I managed. One more thing about Cole Aldrich. Don't sell to him. Don't take his calls or his meetings. The water rights are not why he wants this land. He's been circling this parcel for 6 years, and whatever he's been told about it, whatever he knows more than he's said to anyone. What he knows is what I should have dealt with 50 years ago. Be careful, Nora, and take care of your daughter. From what I've heard, she sounds like Clara, your great-uncle, Harlan Stokes. She read the letter twice. Then she sat with it in the way you sat with something that had changed the shape of a thing you thought you understood. Clara had left a marker on the north wall of the silo 6 months before she died, so that if anything happened to her, somebody would know where to look. Harlan had never looked. 52 years he'd kept the silo sealed and watched Cole Aldrich circle and written a letter to a great niece he'd met once, who watched the light change and didn't say a word. You'll act when you find something. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, Greenfield notebook in hand, fully awake, a streak of dust on her forehead from sleeping on the cushions. She looked at Nora and at the letter on the table and at Nora's face. Can we go look at the silo today? She said. They crossed the farmyard in the cool of the morning, the light clear and flat now, past the hour of gold. The cottonwood threw its early shadow across the yard. Lily had her binoculars around her neck and her notebook in her hand, and she walked with the stride of someone who had made a decision about what the morning was for. Nora tried the padlock first. The key went in, or almost. She worked it steadily, tried different angles, applied pressure. The keyway was corroded at the entrance from decades of weather. She could feel the key engaging something inside the mechanism, but the cylinder would not turn. She straightened up. Tried again. On the 4th attempt, she felt movement inside the lock, a fractional yield, and then it stopped. The internal components were frozen solid from disuse. She got the WD-40 from the toolbox. She worked the nozzle into the keyway and sprayed until she felt resistance, then stepped back. While it soaked, they walked the circumference of the silo. The east face, the same rust red, the same scale up close that required adjusting to. The north face came around last. The light was different here. The farmhouse and the tool shed blocked the direct morning sun, and the north face stayed in a cooler shadow through the first part of the day. The rust here was still dense, but fractionally different in texture from the sun-facing sides, as if 50 years of marginally more protected conditions had produced a marginally different surface. Lily walked with one hand trailing along the base of the corrugated steel. She always touched things. Nora had long since stopped trying to redirect it because the touching was part of how Lily understood the world, tactile information running alongside everything else, all of it going into the field notebook eventually in some form. She stopped. She pulled her hand back from the wall. Mom. Her voice was not alarmed. It was the voice she used when she found something she needed examined. Nora came around to where Lily was standing, at 4 feet off the ground, on the corrugated north wall of the silo, in paint so old it had oxidized with the metal beneath it until paint and rust had become nearly indistinguishable, was a handprint. Small. A child's hand, pressed flat, the fingers together, left there with deliberate force by someone who had wanted it to stay. The paint had been red. Now it was the color of old rust mixed with something darker, the color of something that had been in one place for more than half a century. Below the palm of the handprint, the index finger extended separately from the others, pointed downward, clear and deliberate, aimed at something beneath the hand, beneath the wall, beneath the ground, scratched into the corrugated surface around the handprint, in the careful rounded script of someone taught penmanship in a mid-century classroom, letters that the rust had been working at for 52 years. Nora crouched beside her daughter. The first line was mostly legible. Underneath, tells the truth, the second line was nearly gone. The rust had done its work there. She could see that letters existed, could identify shapes that might have been characters, but could not resolve them into words. Lily's voice was very quiet. What does it say? Nora traced the first line with her finger, hovering just above the surface. Underneath, tells the truth. Who wrote it? Nora stood slowly. Her knees ached from crouching. A woman named Clara, she said. She lived here a long time ago. She looked at the base of the north wall. The concrete pad circling the silo's foundation ran 8 feet out from the steel base. Here, on the north face, the surface of that pad was different. Fractionally different in color, slightly different in the texture of the aggregate in the surface concrete. You would walk past it 100 times without noticing. She noticed because she was looking for it, because Harlan's letter had told her where to look, because her daughter had run her hand along the wall and found the marker a woman named Clara had pressed there in red paint in the autumn of 1970, so that if anything happened to her, somebody would know where to look. This section of the concrete pad had been poured separately, not with the original construction. Later, on top of something, or around something, or to seal something in. Lily was writing in the field notebook. She wrote for a long moment without speaking. Then she looked up. Mom. Her voice was careful and precise. If Clara put a marker here to show where to look, and the marker points down, and the concrete under the marker was poured separately from the rest. Yes, then whatever she was marking is underneath the concrete. Nora looked at the north wall of the sealed silo. 90 feet of rust-red steel. A child's handprint in oxidized paint pointing at a concrete pad that had been poured in 2 stages. Harlan Stokes, who had sat on this property for 52 years and watched Cole Aldrich circle and left a letter that said, "I was too afraid. You won't be." The WD-40 was still soaking in the padlock on the south face. She looked at her daughter. "We're going to need to get that door open," she said. "And then we're going to need to see what's under that concrete." Lily closed the field notebook. She looked at the north wall for a long moment with the focused squint she used for things she was still categorizing. Then she looked at Nora. "I think Harlan was scared of this for a long time," she said. "Yes." Nora kept her eyes on the handprint. "I think he was. We're not scared, though." Nora thought about $83. 41. About the inhaler at the pharmacy. About the envelope she'd carried across 3 states. About Clara, who had pressed a painted hand against cold metal in 1970 and pointed downward and said, "Look here, somebody. Look here." "No," she said. "We're not scared." The wind moved across the stubbled field behind them. Overhead, the Kansas sky was wide and pale and entirely indifferent to what happened next. Lily stood beside her, field notebook under her arm, binoculars around her neck, ready to document whatever came. The north silo stood in its rust and its silence, keeping its 52-year secret. Not for much longer. They tried the padlock again 20 minutes after the first attempt. After a second application of WD-40 had time to work deeper into the mechanism. Nora stood at the south-face door with the key while Lily sat on a flat piece of concrete near the base of the silo, field notebook open, pen moving. She was documenting the exterior dimensions as best she could estimate them, the rust texture at different heights, the way the corrugated steel caught the mid-morning light at angles that changed the surface from brown-red to almost orange. The key went in smoothly this time. She turned it. The cylinder resisted, then moved. A quarter turn. Half. Something inside the lock released with a click she felt more than heard. A mechanical grip that had been set in 1971 finally yielding to 40 years of weather and 20 minutes of penetrating oil. The padlock dropped open in her hand. The door itself was the next problem. The hinges had expanded and contracted through 52 seasons of Kansas weather, and the steel of the door and its frame had become a single unit in the way of things that have been closed too long. Nora worked the pry bar from her toolbox into the seam along the left edge, applied steady weight, felt the frame protest in a way she could feel through the handle of the bar. She moved to the lower edge and worked that seam. Back to the top, working the perimeter until the steel reluctantly accepted that it was going to have to yield. The door swung outward on a sound that she felt at the base of her back teeth. The interior exhaled. Not the smell she'd expected. Not rot or grain dust or the stale compressed quality of a sealed space. What came out was cool and dry, drier than the outdoor air, drier than anything she'd experienced indoors, with a faint mineral quality that belonged to air sealed inside concrete and steel for a very long time. Underneath it, something else. Cedar. Faint and specific, as if the source of it was somewhere deeper inside than the entrance. Lily appeared at her elbow. "Mom, the temperature is different in there." "Yes. Warmer outside, cooler inside." She wrote it down. "That means the walls have very high thermal mass. The temperature inside stays stable regardless of outside temperature." "For how long?" Lily looked at her. 52 years, probably." They went back to the truck for the flashlights. Nora handed one to Lily, and they stepped through the door. The interior of the silo was not what she had expected. She had expected grain, or the compacted, chalky residue of grain, the fossilized remnant of whatever had been stored here before Harlan sealed the door. She had expected evidence of the purpose for which the structure was built. What she found instead was organized. The concrete floor was clean, not dusty, not gritty, not softened by the biological decay you'd expect after 5 decades of animal activity. The walls curved upward in their corrugated arc to a height the flashlight beams couldn't reach. Along the interior walls, wooden shelving had been constructed at some point, well built, set directly against the steel, running from the floor to approximately 8 feet in a series of tiers. On the shelving, and stacked on the floor in careful arrangements, were objects covered in canvas tarps the same color and approximate age as the tarps that had been over the furniture in the farmhouse. Different sizes. Flat rectangles stood upright against the lower shelving. Wooden crates of varying dimensions sat on the floor in rows, some the size of a briefcase, some the size of a steamer trunk. Cylinder-shaped bundles stood vertical in one corner, tied with rope that had gone stiff and dark with time, but had held. There were more shapes further back in the dark, more of the silo than she could see from the entrance. She stood in the doorway and swept her flashlight from left to right. Lily did the same beside her. "Someone put all of this here on purpose," Lily said. Nora counted the flat rectangles against the lower shelf. 14 visible. More further back. The crates on the floor numbered at least 30. "I need you to stay here for a minute," Nora said. Lily looked like she wanted to object. She didn't. Nora walked back to the north face of the silo. She crouched at the base of the wall near Clara's handprint. The concrete pad here, the section with different aggregate and fractionally different color, was approximately 4 feet by 3 feet in the seam she could feel under her fingers. She ran her hands along each edge of the rectangle. The concrete cap had been filled and painted over and had been sitting in this climate for decades. But the seam was there, distinct enough to follow. She got the pry bar. The concrete cap was thinner than it appeared. She worked the bar into the north edge, found purchase, applied her full weight. Something shifted, not the pad itself, but a layer below it, a different material, the wooden edge of a hatch cover that had been sealed under concrete in 1971. She worked the bar along each edge in turn, breaking the fill free, pieces of concrete dropping onto the ground. Eventually she got enough purchase to pull. The hatch came up in 2 sections. Wooden, cedar, heavy, breaking apart at the joint where the concrete fill had separated it over the years. Below it, stairs. Cedar stairs, steep, leading down into darkness that smelled exactly like the faint cedar she'd caught inside the silo. But stronger here, concentrated, the smell of an enclosed cedar space that had been sealed for a very long time. Lily had come around the corner and was standing 2 feet away with her flashlight lit. Nora looked at her. "I'm coming," Lily said. "Don't even." They went down together. The chamber was approximately 20 feet by 20 feet, the ceiling 7 feet high, carved into the Kansas bedrock and lined on every surface with cedar planking. The planks were thick, fitted carefully, the kind of work that required time and intention and someone who understood that the environment inside mattered as much as the door. The air was drier than the silo above and cooler still, the earth providing the insulation that concrete and steel alone couldn't sustain. The cedar smell was complete and clean, the smell of a room that had been cold and dry and undisturbed for half a century. It was not empty. A metal filing cabinet stood against the east wall, gunmetal gray, for drawers, the kind manufactured to be fireproof. Beside it, a wooden work table with a surface worn smooth from use over years. On the table, a kerosene lamp and a box of matches. Nora lit the lamp. The warm light spread across the cedar walls. On the remaining walls, more shelving, more canvas-covered objects, more wooden crates smaller than the ones in the silo above. These were denser, heavier, the shelving carrying their weight in the particular way of things that were not light. Along the south wall, directly below the interior of the silo's south face, a set of rectangular wooden boxes sat stacked 2 high, approximately 20 of them, bound with steel banding. The boxes were roughly the size of a large toolbox, and Nora looked at the banding and thought about how weight was distributed and had a feeling she couldn't name yet. Lily swept her flashlight around the chamber and wrote. On the work table beside the lamp, a card index box, the kind used for recipe cards or library catalog systems. Nora opened it. Index cards in Clara's handwriting. She recognized it from the height marks on the bedroom wall, the same careful rounded script taught in Kansas classrooms in the 1940s. Each card had a number in the top right corner, a brief description in the center, and a date of acquisition at the bottom. The first card, item 001. Lakota elk tooth dress, ca. 1890. Acquired Griggsville Estate Auction, April 1959. Seller, Estate of W. Carver. Provenance, unknown prior to 1941. See catalog. The second, item 002. Sioux ceremonial pipe bag, ca. 1880 to 1900. Beadwork, sinew construction, eagle feathers attached. Acquired directly from J. Harrington, April 1959. The third, item 003. Grant Wood. Study 4 fall plowing. Oil on board, 14 by 18 inches, 1931. Initialed lower right. Acquired from the artist's estate, March 1960. Nora stopped on that card and read it again. Grant Wood. She knew the name the way most people knew it, through the painting reproduced on posters and textbook covers and tote bags sold in museum gift shops. American Gothic, the couple in front of the house with the pitched roof and the pitchfork. She knew he was significant. She did not know, standing in a cedar room below a Kansas wheat field, precisely how significant. She kept going through the cards. Item 004. Grant Wood. Woman with plants. Oil on canvas, 20 by 18 inches, 1929. Acquired from the artist's estate, March 1960. Item 007. Thomas Hart Benton. Threshing wheat. Oil on canvas, 36 by 48 inches, 1939. Acquired directly from the artist, 1941. Item 009. John Stuart Curry. Tornado over Kansas. Preparatory study, oil on panel, 24 by 30 inches, 1929. Acquired from estate of R. Haley, 1962. Item 012. Dorothea Lange. Original press photograph. Migrant mother. Full press print, 1936. With original caption sheet, Resettlement Administration stamp. Acquired from personal estate of Margaret Lange, 1967. She set the card index down. Lily was reading over her shoulder. Mom. Her voice was controlled in the way it got when she was working hard to stay measured. Those are famous people. Yes. Some of those names are in my history book from school. Nora turned to look at her daughter. You have an art history book? It's an American history book, but it has art in it. Lily's eyes were very still. I know Grant Wood. And Thomas Hart Benton. And Dorothea Lange. They're in my book. Nora picked up her phone and turned on the camera. She started photographing the index cards one by one, working through them systematically, the card number and description and date of acquisition for each item. The numbers ran higher than she'd expected. She flipped to the back of the box. The last card was numbered 847. 847 items. She put the phone in her jacket pocket. Go back up to the silo, she told Lily. Look at the labels stenciled on the crates and the backs of the flat canvases. Write down every number you see. Every label. Don't touch anything without gloves and don't move anything, but look and write everything. Lily was already on the stairs. She stopped on the second step and looked back. Mom, are we okay? Nora looked at the cedar walls. At the kerosene lamp throwing light across 50 years of organized silence. I think so, she said. Go. She started with the wooden boxes along the south wall. The steel banding on the nearest one had a small padlock, the same type as the silo door. The same key ring had a key labeled storage box, same key for all. The lock opened on the first turn. She lifted the lid. Inside, fitted into compartments lined with oilcloth, were coins. United States gold coins, the kind minted before 1933, when the Roosevelt administration had called in privately held gold and halted domestic coinage in that metal. She picked one up. A $20 St. Gaudens double eagle, dated 1928, the surface bright and clean in the lamplight, the eagle on the reverse sharp enough to count the tail feathers in detail. Mint state, or very close to it. The relief of the figure on the obverse caught the kerosene light and threw small shadows that showed the depth of the strike. She had a brief, involuntary memory of Marcus's coin-collecting phase during the first year they were together, the way he'd explained grades and mintage and the difference between a coin that had circulated and one that had been set aside immediately, the way he'd said, condition is everything. A common coin in exceptional condition is worth more than a rare coin in average condition. She opened a second compartment. More double eagles, different dates, the same extraordinary preservation. A third, smaller coins, $10 Indians, their feathered profiles wearing the precise degree of use of coins that had been handled with care but had lived in pockets before being set aside. A fourth, $5 half. Eagles, dates running from 1909 to 1929. She opened the lid of the second box. The same. She opened 3 more at random, sampling across the 20 boxes. Each one the same quality. Each one the same careful compartmentalization, cotton padding between the rows, the coins sitting in their spaces with the patience of things that had been put somewhere correctly and stayed there. She stood up from the last box and pressed her hand flat against the cedar wall of the chamber and took 2 slow breaths. Then she went back upstairs to the silo. Lily was at the far end, notebook open, flashlight in one hand and pen in the other. She had uncovered the corner of a canvas tarp on the nearest flat rectangle and revealed the back of a stretcher bar with a stenciled number, 007. She was copying it into her notebook with the care of someone who understood that accuracy was the whole point. Nora went to the flat rectangles leaning against the lower shelf. 14 of them visible here, with more further along the wall in the dark. She lifted the corner of the canvas covering the nearest one. Stretcher bars came into view. She lifted the tarp away completely. The painting was a landscape. A Kansas wheat field in summer, the cut sheaves in rows, the sky enormous behind them in shades of golden white and pale blue. The style was immediately identifiable even to someone who had not spent her life in museums. The rolling stylized earth forms, the almost sculptural curves of the fields, the specific green gold of the grass at the field's edge. In the lower right corner, small, the artist's initials, GW. She moved to the next one. The tarp came away to reveal a larger canvas, a man at work in a barnyard. The motion of threshing wheat caught in paint with a quality that was simultaneously documentary and something else. The figures defined with the dense physicality of carved wood rather than observed human bodies. THB in the lower left corner, small and definite. The third canvas, a study of a tornado crossing flat land. The sky above it dark with a weight that pressed downward on the farmhouse in the foreground, the house minute against the weather. JSC. Lily had come to stand beside her. I recognized that one. Lily's voice was quiet and precise. The tornado one. My teacher showed us a picture of it in class. Nora looked at her. You're sure? The style. Lily looked at the painting without touching it. John Stuart Curry painted Kansas specifically. He's one of the American regionalists. She paused. Mom, originals are worth different than reproductions. Nora turned to look at her. My teacher said a painting that a famous artist actually made can be worth millions of dollars. Yes. Lily looked at the row of flat rectangles running along the wall and disappearing into the dark. How many are there? Nora picked up her phone. Let's count. They worked the length of the silo together, Nora lifting corners of tarps while Lily recorded every visible stenciled number and every initial or signature she could see. Some canvases had a second layer of archival paper beneath the canvas, and these they left covered. Some stretcher bars had titles written in pencil on the horizontal crosspiece. They noted every word. 23 paintings in total. 23 canvases, some initialed, some signed, some waiting for the catalog cards in the filing cabinet below to give them context. The largest measured close to 4 feet across. Several were studies, smaller panels, preparatory works. The smallest was not much bigger than a standard piece of paper. Nora photographed everything. Every stretcher bar with its stenciled number, every visible initial or title, every fold of canvas where the tarp had shifted enough to show a corner of the painted surface. They went back down to the cedar chamber. The filing cabinet, once unlocked, was organized the way Clara had organized everything. Decades of material arranged with a precision that was not administrative habit, but genuine care. The top drawer held the full catalog, the binders that the index cards summarized. 3-ring binders, one for each category of item, heavy with acetate sleeve pages holding photographs and typed descriptions and handwritten annotations. The binder labeled Paintings, Volume 1 opened to a typed cover page. Prepared by Harlan Stokes. Begun September 1968. Last updated February 18, 1971. The introduction was 1 paragraph. This catalog documents a collection assembled by our father, Elton Ray Stokes, between 1929 and 1959, and extended by myself between 1959 and 1971. Our father began acquiring artworks during the Great Depression, when painters were unable to sell at any price and often traded directly with farmers for cash or goods. He believed the work had value that the market at that moment had failed to recognize. He was correct. I have continued his acquisitions with the same conviction. What follows is a complete accounting of every item as I understand it. I am writing this because I am not certain I will be well for long. If I am not, and if anyone reads this after me, what is here does not belong to us forever. Some of it belongs to museums, where people can see it. Some belongs to families and peoples from whom it came. Please act accordingly. Please do better than holding it in a field. Lily read the introduction over Nora's shoulder. She did the same thing Clara did, Lily said. What do you mean? Lily pointed to the last line. Please do better than holding it. She knew it wasn't enough to keep it. She was trying to tell whoever found it what to do next. Nora turned the page. Clara's catalog entries were meticulous. For each painting, she had a photograph she'd taken herself, a description of condition and provenance, and a value estimate written in pencil, the uncertainty built into the medium rather than the ink. Her estimates were based on recent auction records she'd tracked in trade publications, clipped and filed in a separate pocket at the back of each binder section. The grant would study for fall plowing. Clara's 1970 estimate, $85,000. Marginal note in pencil, likely to appreciate significantly. Wood's reputation continues to grow. The second wood canvas, titled in Clara's documentation Summer Bounty, listed as a finished work from 1932. Clara's estimate, $220,000. Below the estimate, in smaller writing, this may be the lost canvas referenced in the letter from W.H.B. 1964. Cannot confirm without professional authentication. Do not sell without verifying. Nora photographed every page. The second drawer held correspondence. Decades of it, organized by year in manila folders. Letters to and from dealers and appraisers and museum staff and estate attorneys, spanning 1960 to February 1971. Clara had been methodical, and she had been careful. She had never disclosed the full scope of what the family held. Each letter inquired about a single item, always framed as assistance for a friend or a remote estate acquisition she was handling. She gathered information about values and provenance and authentication procedures without exposing what she knew. The third drawer held the artifacts catalog, Volume 2, and this was where Clara's voice in the documentation became something different. Same cover page, same last update date, same final sentence. Please do better than holding it in a field. The first entry, Item 001. A Lakota elk tooth dress, ca. 1890. The photograph showed a garment of extraordinary density, the elk teeth sewn in rows so tight the fabric beneath was barely visible. Clara's note. This dress represents an investment of years of labor and the harvesting of many hundreds of elk teeth by a woman whose name we do not know. It is a masterwork by any standard. It belongs in a Lakota community or in a museum in active consultation with the Lakota peoples. I do not know how to accomplish this return. I am documenting it so that someone else, who knows more than I do, can. Item 012. A Sioux ceremonial shield, painted hide on wood frame, with imagery I cannot interpret without assistance. Clara's note. The provenance on this piece is the most troubling I have encountered. Documentation suggests it left Sioux hands in the 1920s through circumstances I cannot fully reconstruct from available records. The Carver estate sold it in 1959, and I purchased it at that auction specifically to prevent it going to a collector who intended to use it as wall decoration. I do not believe preventing that outcome makes my holding it correct. I held it because I could not yet figure out how to return it correctly. That is not a sufficient reason. It needs to go home. Lily had come to sit on the floor beside Nora, cross-legged, reading over her shoulder as Nora turned the pages. She didn't want any of it, Lily said. She wanted to know what to do with it. She wanted to give it back. Lily traced the edge of a catalog page without touching it. She just didn't know exactly how. Nora kept turning pages. Entry after entry, Clara's discomfort present in every note about artifacts with unclear provenance. Her genuine moral uncertainty running through the documentation like a current. She was not performing concern. She was trying to work something out and documenting the process of trying. Item 089. A pair of Cheyenne moccasins, fully beaded, ca. 1870, Condition extraordinary. Clara's note. I have found no record of their history before 1929, when our father purchased them from a general store in Dodge City for $3. $3. What the person selling them was paid I don't know, and probably didn't think to ask. Their actual worth, in cultural and historical terms, is something I am not in a position to calculate. What I know is that $3 in 1929 was not a fair price for what these are. The fourth drawer. Envelopes. Sealed, labeled in Clara's handwriting with institutional names. The Smithsonian Institution, National Museum of Natural History. The Nelson Atkins Museum of Art. The Hurd Museum, Phoenix. The State Historical Society of North Dakota. The Oglala Sioux Tribe Cultural Center. The Cheyenne and Arapaho Tribes of Oklahoma. The Denver Art Museum. A University Art History Department in Kansas City. Each one dated February 1971. Each one sealed. Clara had written the letters, had addressed them and sealed them and filed them in this cabinet, and then she had died 4 weeks later in her kitchen on a Wednesday morning before she had mailed them. Nora held the envelope addressed to the Oglala Sioux Tribe Cultural Center in both hands and felt the weight of something that had been waiting for delivery for 52 years. She was putting the envelopes carefully back in the drawer when Lily's voice came from the top of the stairs. Not alarmed. Specific. Mom, someone's here. Nora climbed the stairs quickly and came around the north face of the silo into the late morning light. A vehicle was parked on the near side of the farmhouse. A large truck, dark blue, extended cab, the chrome trim catching the sun. Too new, too clean, the kind of vehicle that announced money without wanting to look like it was announcing money. A man was walking from the truck toward the farmhouse. Mid-50s, broad-shouldered, wearing a canvas jacket that had been chosen for the setting rather than the work. He moved with the particular ease of a person who entered other people's spaces and did not consider whether his entrance was welcome. Lily stood 8 feet from Nora, notebook against her chest, watching the man with the flat attention she used for things she was still categorizing. He saw them as he came around the farmhouse corner, adjusted his path toward them without breaking stride, as if he had already known where they'd be. Miss Callahan. His voice was warm and measured in equal parts. I'm Cole Aldrich. He extended his hand, and his smile arrived at exactly the right moment to accompany it. I figured you'd be out here taking stock. I wanted to put a face to the offer rather than handle everything through Robert. Nora took his hand. His grip was calibrated, not dominating, not weak. Mr. Deerfield mentioned you'd be in touch, she said. I haven't had a chance to reach out yet. Of course. I hope you don't mind my stopping by. He glanced past her, toward the silos. The padlock on the south-face door was hanging open. The door itself was pulled mostly closed, but not latched. The hatch fragments on the north-face pad were visible from where he stood. His gaze moved to them, and then back to her with the speed of someone who had trained themselves to look at things quickly. She watched him not react. Looks like you've been exploring, he said. It's my property. Of course. He recalibrated the warmth in his voice, a small adjustment. Look, I wanted to reiterate our interest. $95,000 is a fair price given the current condition. We could close quickly and spare you the complexity of managing a rural estate from Tulsa. The water rights alone make it worth our while. His attention moved back to the north face of the silo, to the hatch debris on the ground. This time he let himself look a moment longer. Looks like you got the hatch open. He kept his voice conversational. I wasn't sure that concrete would break cleanly after all this time. Nora looked at him. You knew about the hatch. He paused. A brief pause with something underneath it. Harlan mentioned some of the property's features over the years, he said. We spoke occasionally. He mentioned a hatch beneath the north concrete pad. He mentioned structural features of the silos generally. Aldrich's voice had gone careful in the way voices went when they were being arranged. I didn't want to misrepresent what I know. I've been interested in this property for a while. I have a general sense of what may be here. Nora held his gaze. Harlan left me a letter, she said. He asked me specifically not to sell to you and not to take your meetings. The pleasantness in his face stayed on. What moved was the calculation behind it. Is that right? That's what he said. Aldrich was quiet for a moment. He was deciding something. I understand, he said finally. I'd still encourage you to think carefully before proceeding alone. This type of estate can become legally complicated very quickly. Rural properties with undisclosed contents, complicated ownership histories. You'd be surprised how fast something like this becomes a burden without the right support in place. He let that sit for a moment. Our offer remains on the table. He gave the north face hatch one more look, long enough this time to make no pretense of not looking, and then he walked back to his truck without hurrying. The engine started. The truck turned in the farmyard and went down the gravel drive. Lily watched until the dust settled. He knew, she said. Yes, he knew about the hatch. He's known something about this property for years. Nora watched the county road where the truck had turned. That's why the offer is 3 times what the land is worth. The water rights are real, but they're not $95,000 real. What do we do? Nora had her phone out. We called Deerfield. Deerfield answered immediately. He listened to the account of Aldrich's visit without interrupting, and when she finished, his pause was the pause of someone reordering their understanding of something. Miss Callahan, he said, there's something I should have told you yesterday, and I'm sorry I didn't. Cole Aldrich's firm is not what it presents itself as. They're incorporated as an agricultural land consolidator, but their legal division specializes in estate asset acquisition, including art and collectibles. They've been involved in a number of disputed estate cases in this region over the past 12 years. Cases where private collections were acquired from estates at significantly below market value. How did he know about this collection? Harlan had a previous attorney, a man named Garfield who retired in 1997. I don't know what Harlan told him, but Aldrich has been approaching this property since 2017, which is when Harlan's health began declining in visible ways. That's not coincidence. Can he do anything legally? With a clean transfer of title and a valid will? No, but he can apply pressure. He can raise questions about undisclosed assets in an estate appraisal, contest the property assessment, file nuisance challenges that cost you time and money even if they have no merit. Deerfield paused again. What did you find, Miss Callahan? She told him. The silence that followed lasted longer than any pause she'd heard from him. I need to make some calls, he said. Do not move anything, and do not allow anyone onto that property. I know someone who can come and give you a qualified assessment. She's been doing this work for 30 years. Can you stay at the property for a few more days? Nora thought about the cracked windshield, about Dale's Wednesday deadline, about the pharmacy counter on Denver Avenue where Lily's inhaler had been sitting uncollected for 11 days. Yes, she said. I can stay. Margaret Lyle arrived the following morning before 9. She drove a Subaru wagon with mud on the wheel wells and 2 days' worth of cardboard coffee cups on the dash, and she got out already moving, her attention going to the silos before she'd finished closing the car door. She was mid-50s, compact, with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, wearing clothes chosen for moving around and rather than for making an impression. She shook Nora's hand. She shook Lily's hand with the same seriousness she'd given Nora's. Show me, she said. They showed her. Margaret spent 4 hours in the silo and the underground chamber. She did not rush. She moved through what she was examining with a patience that Nora recognized as the patience of someone who understood that speed was the enemy of accuracy, that anything misread now would compound later in ways that were difficult to correct. She read Clara's catalog binders from the first page. She photographed catalog entries alongside the objects they described. She used a loupe from her jacket pocket to examine the surfaces of 4 paintings they uncovered at her request. She replaced each canvas cover carefully afterward. She opened 2 coin boxes, examining specific coins under the loupe, turning them slowly in the light. She read 6 artifacts entries against the objects themselves, comparing photographs and descriptions with what sat on the cedar shelves. Lily stayed close throughout. Her notebook filled steadily. At one point Margaret stopped and held out her hand toward Lily's notebook. Lily handed it over without hesitation. Margaret read several pages, her expression controlled, her eyes moving with the speed of a professional reader accustomed to assessing documentation quickly. She handed it back. You've been doing this since yesterday? Since yesterday afternoon and this morning. Lily held the notebook flat against her chest. I wanted a record that wasn't in the official documents, in case something happened to the official documents. Margaret looked at Nora. She's 7, Nora said. And 3/4, Lily said. Margaret's controlled expression allowed itself something very slight. She turned back to the filing cabinet. At noon she came and sat on the cedar floor of the underground chamber with her notes arranged around her. The kerosene lamp had been supplemented by 2 LED lanterns Deerfield had thought to include when he called ahead, and the chamber was well lit now for the first time in its history. Nora sat across from her. Lily sat between them. All right, Margaret said. Here's my preliminary assessment. I want to be clear about what preliminary means in this context. A formal appraisal requires time, third-party authentication for a number of these items, detailed provenance research, and specialist expertise for each category. What I'm about to tell you is based on 30 years of experience in estate acquisitions. I'm confident in the framework of it, but the specific numbers will move during formal appraisal. They may move up. They may move in specific items down. The overall picture I don't expect to change materially. She looked at her notes. The paintings. 23 canvases. I've identified signature or initialing on 17 of them. Of those 17, I've confirmed 4 as consistent with Grant Wood's documented hand and style, and I have high confidence on all 4. 2 of the wood pieces are major finished works, not studies. One of those 2 may be the canvas documented in Wood's catalog raisonné as lost after 1933. If authentication confirms that, and I believe it will, that painting is worth at auction between $60 and $90 million. Nora heard the numbers arrive somewhere below thought. There are 2 Thomas Hart Benton canvases, both large-format finished works, both from his most significant period. A John Stuart Curry study that is either a direct preparatory work for or a close variant of a finished piece in a major public collection. A Dorothea Lange press print of Migrant Mother, one of 15 known original press prints from the original production. A comparable print sold at auction 7 years ago for $4.2 million. She turned a page. The remaining canvases include works by artists I'd need to research before assigning values. Some will be significant, some will not. The catalog documentation Clara prepared is the best single tool we have for establishing provenance on each work, and it's far better than what most private collections of this era possess. She turned another page. The coins. I've opened 5 of the 20 boxes. The gold content alone across all 20, at current gold prices, is not trivial. But gold content is the floor here, not the ceiling. The condition of what I've examined is exceptional. Specifically, the 1928 double eagles in the first box I opened are in what I'd grade as MS 63 to MS 65. An MS 65 1928 double eagle sold at auction 2 years ago for $14,000 per coin. My rough estimate across all 20 boxes is approximately 3,000 coins of varying denominations and dates. If the unexamined boxes hold comparable quality, and the samples I took suggest they do, the coin collection is worth between $18 and $24 million. She turned a page. The artifacts are the most complex category, and I want to be direct with you about why. The monetary valuation of these items is genuinely secondary to the restitution question. These are objects of extraordinary cultural significance, some of them sacred, some of them the kind of item that tribal nations have been actively trying to recover through NAGPRA and other legal mechanisms for decades. Clara's catalog notes on this category show she understood this. Her documentation is specifically oriented toward eventual return, not toward sale. She paused. Monetary valuation of this category is something I'd rather not calculate until proper tribal consultation has happened. What I will say is that the collection as a whole, in this category, is significant enough to justify the time that consultation will take. Lily was writing steadily. Margaret set her notes down. She looked at Nora directly. I've been doing this for a long time. Private estate collections, major auction house work, museum acquisitions. I've walked into spaces expecting to find significant collections and found ordinary things. I've walked into ordinary spaces and found things that stopped me cold. She looked around the cedar chamber. This stopped me cold. What is the total? Nora's voice came out steady. Preliminary. Margaret held the word in place for a moment. Based on what I've seen this morning and my assessment of the catalog documentation, formal appraisal will refine this number. But if even half of what I believe this collection to be is confirmed on authentication, and I expect more than half to be confirmed, the total value of this collection is between $380 and $440 million. The silence was complete. Lily made a sound that was not words. The sound she made when a mathematical fact exceeded what she'd been expecting by an order of magnitude. Margaret looked at her. Then she looked at Nora. I know, she said, to both of them. Nora put her hand flat on the cedar floor beside her. The wood was cool and smooth and entirely real under her palm. She kept it there for a long moment. She thought about the figure on the ATM screen 11 days ago. She thought about Lily's inhaler sitting uncollected at the pharmacy. She thought about Dale and the Wednesday deadline and the cracked windshield and the late fee that compounded $25 each additional week and the 6 weeks of back rent, and Karen in the leasing office who had decided incentives were required. She thought about Clara, who had typed this catalog and written those letters and pressed a painted hand against the north wall of a silo and pointed downward, and then died at 36 on a Wednesday morning in the kitchen of the house across the yard. What happens now? Lily asked. That depends on your mother, Margaret said. She looked at Nora and waited. You have a collection of extraordinary financial and cultural significance. Some of it has unambiguous ownership, which is you. Some of it is ethically complicated, specifically the artifacts and possibly one or two of the artworks, depending on how the provenance research develops. Clara has left you a detailed map. She did the research and she wrote the catalog and she wrote the letters and she knew what should go where. The sealed letters in the 4th drawer. Yes, you could start there. Deliver the letters Clara already wrote. 52 years late, but sent. Nora thought about the envelope addressed to the Oglala Sioux Tribe Cultural Center, sitting in the drawer above their heads. But first, Margaret said, you need to secure this collection. Today, Aldrich knows something's here, and he's not patient by nature. I've come across his firm before in other estate situations. He moves quickly when he thinks someone is unprepared. Nora's phone had been buzzing intermittently since late morning. She pulled it out. 14 missed calls. 9 from numbers she didn't recognize. 5 text messages. The first read, Miss Callahan, I represent a private buyer with significant interest in the Stokes estate. My client is prepared to exceed any existing offer substantially. Please call at your earliest convenience. The second was similar. The third was from a Kansas City number she didn't recognize and said, I'm a journalist with the Kansas City Star. I've received information suggesting the Stokes estate may include a significant private art collection. Can we speak? She held the phone out to Margaret. Margaret looked at the screen. Her expression didn't change. She'd seen this before. Aldrich has been making calls since this morning, Nora said. Yes. How many people did he speak with in the hours between leaving here and now? That's the question. Margaret stood up from the floor without difficulty. I'm going to call 2 colleagues. One handles collections, security, and transport. The other is an attorney who works specifically in estate and cultural property law. Both can be here by tomorrow morning. In the meantime, you need a padlock on that silo door and something covering that hatch. She paused at the bottom of the stairs. Miss Callahan. She looked back at Nora. I asked you what happens now, and I said it depends on you. Let me tell you what your options actually are so you understand what you're choosing between. Nora looked at her. You can sell everything. All of it. Through a major auction house, on a timeline that suits you. The artifacts would require tribal consultation before sale, which adds time, but eventually everything goes to market and you walk away very wealthy by any measure. That is a clean and legal path. She paused. Or you can do what Clara spent 3 years trying to figure out how to do. Return the artifacts through proper consultation with the tribal nations who have claims. Donate paintings to public institutions where people can see them. Sell what has no restitution claims, at auction, where the market sets the price. Use the proceeds however seems right. That path is slower and harder, and the money you eventually see will be somewhat less than the alternative. Lily looked up from her notebook. Margaret looked at Lily, then back at Nora. Clara left instructions, Nora said. She wrote a catalog and she wrote letters to every institution that should receive something. She knew where each item should go. She did. So we start there. We start with what Clara already figured out. Margaret nodded once, slowly, in the way of someone confirming a decision they'd been hoping to hear. Good, she said. Then let's get to work. She went up the stairs and outside to make her calls. Lily sat on the cedar floor with her notebook open and her pen moving. Nora didn't look at what she was writing. She sat with her back against the cool cedar wall and listened to the quiet of a room that had been sealed for 52 years and had just now been opened. She thought about Clara, 36 years old, compiling a catalog in a chamber below a Kansas field in the autumn of 1970, understanding that she might not have much time and writing everything down anyway. Writing the letters and sealing them and filing them and pressing a painted hand against cold metal in the October air and pointing downward so that whoever came next would know where to look. She thought about Harlan, who had known the hand was there and had never come. She thought about Lily, who had put her palm on a cold silo wall on a Kansas morning and said, "Mom, there's something here." Nora looked at her daughter. Lily had stopped writing. She was reading back through the pages she'd filled since yesterday, the catalog numbers and artifact descriptions and coin denominations and painting initials and the list she'd made. Things Clara wanted. The list was long now. Beside each item, Lily had drawn a small arrow indicating direction. Toward a tribal nation. Toward a museum. Toward a family. Toward a gallery where people could walk in off the street and see what had been kept in the dark for more than half a century. "Mom," Lily said without looking up, "we have a lot of letters to send." Nora thought about the fourth drawer of the filing cabinet. The sealed envelopes, 52 years waiting. The Oglala Sioux tribe. The Cheyenne and Arapaho. The museums and universities and historical societies that Clara had addressed and sealed and filed and never gotten to mail. "Yes," Nora said. "We do." Outside, the Kansas sky was enormous and clear. Margaret was on the phone in the farmyard, her voice carrying faintly through the hatch opening above them. On the county road somewhere, Cole Aldrich was making calls of his own. 14 missed calls were sitting unanswered on Nora's phone screen, and more were coming. The cedar chamber was cool and still and full of things that had been waiting for someone who would act. Nora stood up. She looked at the filing cabinet, at the catalog binders, at the sealed envelopes in the fourth drawer, at the card index box on the work table, at 52 years of Clara's work, organized and waiting. She picked up the catalog binder and climbed the stairs into the light. The Kansas City Star article ran online at 6:47 in the morning, 3 days after they'd opened the silo. Nora read it on her phone, standing in the farmhouse kitchen while the camp stove heated water for coffee. The piece was short and speculative, citing anonymous sources who described the Stokes estate as potentially including a significant private art collection of undetermined value. Cole Aldrich was named in the third paragraph as a buyer who had been monitoring the property, described only as an agricultural land investor with interest in the parcel. The journalist had a quote from a neighbor 4 miles down the road who said he'd seen vehicles at the Stokes place, and that Harlan always was a strange one, kept things close. The missed calls on Nora's phone had reached 31. She drank her coffee and didn't answer any of them. Diana Reyes had arrived the previous afternoon, 6 hours after Margaret's call, driving from Kansas City without apparent resentment about the urgency. She was 48, compact and brisk, with the manner of someone who had spent 20 years in courts and had learned that the most important thing you could do in any situation was understand precisely what was happening before you opened your mouth. She reviewed the catalog binders. She reviewed the sealed letters. She pulled up Aldrich's firm's publicly available legal history on her laptop and worked through it with a silence that lasted 2 hours, making occasional notes she didn't share until she'd finished reading. Then she looked at Nora and said, "He's going to file a challenge to the estate assessment. He'll argue that the discovery of assets not disclosed in the original estate filing constitutes grounds for review, and he'll try to use that review period to insert himself as a buyer before you've had time to establish the full picture of what you have. He's done this in 4 other cases I know of in the past 8 years. What does that mean for us? It means he buys time, not legal rights. During that time, he applies financial pressure. He knows most estate heirs in your position don't have the runway to wait out a protracted review. He's betting you need money fast enough to take his offer just to make things simple." She paused. "He'd have been right," Nora said. 6 weeks ago. Diana looked at her steadily. "But not now." Nora thought about the canvas Margaret had identified as potentially the lost Grant Wood, about the sealed envelopes in the fourth drawer, about Clara typing an introduction that said, "Please do better than holding it in a field." "Not now," she said. Diana nodded once. "Good. Then we file a response immediately establishing the estate's intent to assess and handle each asset individually, in accordance with applicable law and with specific attention to federal requirements for the indigenous cultural material. That puts us on record as proceeding lawfully, which undercuts his standing for a challenge. It also signals to the press that this estate has legal representation and a clear direction." She looked at the catalog binders stacked on the kitchen table. "The letters in the fourth drawer are legally significant," she said. "Documents of intent prepared by the original custodian, with specific beneficiaries named. Courts treat those as evidence of testamentary intention even if they don't meet the formal requirements of a will. Clara's letters strengthen your hand. She was quiet for a moment. She was 36 when she wrote them. Yes. Diana looked at Lily, who was at the kitchen table organizing her notebook entries into sections. Paintings, coins, artifacts, letters. What's she doing? Building an index, Nora said. The filing was in Deerfield's office before noon. Aldrich's legal challenge came through the following morning, exactly as Diana had predicted. The language was precise and impersonal, a formal claim that the estate contained undisclosed assets requiring independent appraisal before transfer of title could be considered complete. The challenge named Aldrich's firm as an interested party with standing to participate in that review. Diana read it over coffee at the kitchen table and said, "Textbook. He hasn't changed his approach since 2018. Can he delay the authentication process? He can delay our ability to sell. He cannot delay our ability to document, assess, or begin the repatriation process for the indigenous material, which falls under federal law, not a state law." She turned a page. "He can make the next 3 months more expensive than you'd like. That's the point. He wears you down financially until you'd rather sell than fight." Nora's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Her mother. She answered. "I saw the article," Marlene said. Her voice had the quality of someone who had been sitting with something for a few hours and organized it into a position. "It's more complicated than the article says." "I'm sure it is." Marlene paused. "Nora, this man Aldrich is not going to stop. People like that don't stop. They have more money than you and more lawyers than you and more time than you. If there's a real offer on the table, it might be the right thing to take it and let someone else deal with the complications." "I can't sell the artifacts," Nora said. "They belong to tribal nations." Clara knew that. She wrote the letters. "She left me a map. Then sell the paintings. Take what you can get for the coins. Let someone else sort out what gets returned to whom. You have a daughter to think about." "I know I have a daughter." "Do you?" "Because what I see is a woman who drove across 3 states on $80 for a maybe, found something real, and is now about to let a developer's legal team take it apart while she waits." Nora looked out the kitchen window. The north silo stood in the October morning, its rust-red surface catching the flat light. "Mom, if I sell to Aldrich, the artifacts go to private buyers or get liquidated however his firm liquidates things. Clara's letters never get delivered. The paintings go somewhere private where nobody sees them. Harlan sat on this for 52 years because he was too afraid to act on it. I'm not doing the same thing." The silence on the line lasted long enough that Nora thought about whether the call had dropped. "What does that make you then?" Marlene's voice had gone quieter. "What do you think you're doing that's so different from what he did?" Nora looked at the farmhouse kitchen. The camp stove. Lily's field notebook on the table. The catalog binders in a stack beside it. "Harlan was afraid of getting it wrong," she said. "So he got nothing right at all. I might get some of it wrong. But I'm going to send Clara's letters. I'm going to give the artifacts back. And if Aldrich wants to spend his money fighting that in court, that's his decision to make." Another silence. "Then, you sound like your grandmother." Nora had not expected that. "She was the one who never backed down from things," Marlene said. "Even when she should have. Even when it cost her. She thought in terms of what was right and what wasn't. And that was not always practical." "I know. You never met her. She died before you were born. But that's who you sound like right now." Marlene hung up before Nora could respond. Nora stood at the window with her phone and thought about a woman she'd never met and what it meant to sound like someone you'd never known. That evening, Lily closed her notebook and looked at Nora across the kitchen table. "Mom, did Clara's family know what she was doing? The catalog, the letters. All of it. Harlan knew some of it. Their father started the collection. But the catalog, the letters, that was Clara on her own. So nobody knew how far she'd taken it." "No." Lily turned the notebook over in her hands, thinking. "Then the story's been wrong this whole time," she said. "Everyone thought this property was worth nothing. Aldrich thought he could just buy it because whoever inherited it wouldn't understand what they had. The newspaper described it as a significant private art collection of undetermined value, which makes it sound like nobody knows anything." She looked at Nora. "But we know. And Clara left us everything we need to tell it correctly. We should tell it before Aldrich does." Deerfield arranged use of the Griggsville Town Hall for the following Thursday morning. He called it a press availability, which he explained was a deliberately lower-key framing than a press conference, appropriate for a situation where they wanted to set the record straight without creating more spectacle than was already forming. 12 people showed up. 3 journalists, 1 from the Kansas City Star, 2 from regional outlets. A television crew from a Wichita station that had driven 3 hours on the basis of the Star article. For members of the town council, including Mayor Bonnie Foss, who had known Harlan Stokes for 40 years and had views about what should happen to his land that she had not yet fully expressed. 3 residents who'd come for reasons of their own. Deerfield, Margaret, and Diana, standing at the front beside Nora. Lily sat in the front row with her field notebook. Nora stood at the podium the town hall used for municipal meetings and looked at the room. Fluorescent lights, one of them buzzing slightly. Folding chairs that creaked when people shifted. Outside the windows, Griggsville going about its Thursday morning. She had written notes on an index card. She didn't use them. "My name is Nora Callahan," she said. "I'm a waitress from Tulsa, Oklahoma. 12 days ago I drove here because my great-uncle Harlan Stokes died and left me his farm. I had $83 in my checking account when I got the call. I came because even $30,000 would have changed my daughter's life." She paused. "What I found here was not $30,000. She walked them through it. Not everything. Not the specific numbers, but enough. The sealed silo and the cedar chamber. Clara's catalog. 3 years of work documenting 847 items. The paintings and the photographs and the coins. The indigenous cultural material and what the applicable law said about it, and what Clara's own catalog said about it, which was more direct than any law. This does not belong to us to keep. The sealed letters in the 4th drawer, addressed and stamped and filed and never mailed." She talked about Clara Stokes, who had died at 36 in the kitchen of the farmhouse 4 miles from where they were sitting, who had spent her final years documenting everything and writing the letters and pressing a painted hand against the north wall of the silo in the October air, pointing downward, so that whoever came next would know where to look. She talked about Harlan, who had known the marker was there and who had sat on this property for 52 years because he was afraid of the size of what Clara had left him. She talked about Cole Aldrich, whose firm had filed a legal challenge to the estate assessment the previous morning. She named the firm's history in other estate cases. She said she was not selling. She said, "What Clara built in that cedar chamber was not a fortune for our family to keep. It was an argument, made in paint and gold and beadwork and typed catalog pages, that these things matter, that the people who made them matter, that whoever found them had a responsibility to do what Clara couldn't finish doing." She looked at Lily in the front row. "My daughter is 7 years old." She put her hand on the north wall of the silo and found Clara's marker. "She has been documenting this collection since the first hour we were here, because she understood that documentation is how things survive." Lily was writing in her notebook. She did not look up. "The Clara Stokes collection will be handled in 3 categories," Nora said. "The indigenous cultural material will be returned through formal consultation with the tribal nations named in Clara's catalog. The paintings and photographs will be partially donated to institutions where the public can see them and partially auctioned, with proceeds going to a foundation that will fund repatriation efforts for indigenous cultural objects in private collections and arts education in rural communities. The coins will be sold and the proceeds directed toward the same purpose." She picked up the index card from the podium, set it back down without reading it. "Cole Aldrich's legal challenge is a delay tactic. We will contest it. We expect to prevail." The Kansas City Star journalist raised her hand. "What do you expect the total value of the collection to be?" "We're in the preliminary assessment phase. We're not confirming numbers until formal appraisal is complete." The Wichita television reporter: "What made you decide to go public rather than handle this privately?" Nora thought about Lily at the kitchen table. "We should tell it before Aldrich does. Because the person who built this collection wanted it known," she said. "Clara Stokes spent 3 years documenting everything and writing the letters and leaving the marker on the wall. The least I can do is tell her story correctly." Mayor Bonnie Foss raised her hand. She was 70, with the directness of a woman who had run out of patience for indirection sometime in her 60s. "I knew Harlan Stokes for 40 years, she said. "I never knew any of this." "Nobody did," Nora said. "That was his choice. It wasn't the right one, but it was his." Foss was quiet for a moment. "Clara used to come to the library," she said. "Before she died. She'd be there for hours in the reference section. We all thought she was researching genealogy." She looked around the room. She had more sense than any of us knew. Outside afterward, 3 of the 12 people who'd come found Nora individually. Ruth Carey, who taught art at the regional high school, said she had a climate-controlled storage room the school used for the art program, and if Nora needed a temporary place for anything during the authentication process, it was available. Nora took her number. Gordon Platt, who had been mayor before Bonnie Foss, said, Aldrich's firm tried to acquire the Morrison property 2 years back. Family had an old collection of farm equipment, valuable, and they didn't know it. He got half of it before we understood what was happening. Don't let him near your property. The third person was a girl about Lily's age who came and stood in front of Lily directly. I read about the silo in the paper, she said. Did you really find it? Lily looked at her with appropriate seriousness. My mom found most of it. I found the handprint. The girl thought about that. What's the handprint? It's how Clara told us where to look. The first response to one of Clara's letters came within a week. Not by mail. By phone. A woman named Carolyn Whitehorse, who worked at the cultural center of the Oglala Sioux tribe in Pine Ridge, South Dakota, called on a Tuesday morning while Nora was in the cedar chamber with Paul, the authentication specialist Margaret had brought from Lawrence, who was working his way through the paintings with a thoroughness that made the process feel both important and slow. Nora stepped outside to take the call. Carolyn Whitehorse's voice was steady and measured. She explained that she had received Nora's covering letter along with Clara's original sealed envelope, that she had read both, and that she had sat with the sealed envelope for a considerable time before opening it. I wanted to read it carefully, Carolyn said, because if what you're describing is what you're describing, then this is a 52-year-old letter from a woman who was trying to do the right thing and ran out of time to do it. That's exactly what it is. A pause on the line. Wind moved through the Kansas fields around Nora, the same wind that had been moving across this land longer than any structure built on it. The pipe bag Clara describes in the catalog, Carolyn said. Item 002. Can you tell me its condition? Nora had the catalog binder. She opened to the artifacts section. Item 002, beadwork, sinew construction, eagle feathers attached. She read Clara's condition notes aloud. Excellent condition. The beadwork pattern is intact throughout. Eagle feathers attached. She notes the feathers show some softening of the barbs, but the structure is whole. There was a sound on the other end of the line that Nora could not precisely categorize. Not quite a breath, not quite a word. The pipe bag described in this catalog, Carolyn said finally, may be one of a pair. The other is in our collection here. We've had documentation suggesting a matching piece existed, but we haven't been able to trace it. We've had people looking since 1987. Nora sat down on the concrete base of the silo. She stayed there for a moment with that information settling around her. I'll send you photographs of the complete piece today, she said, and Clara's full entry for it. After the call ended, she looked at the north wall. The handprint was still there, Clara's left hand pressed in faded red paint, the index finger pointing down at the ground below it where the hatch sat under its cover. She thought about a woman pressing a painted hand against cold corrugated steel on an October morning in 1970, thinking, if something happens to me, at least somebody will know where to look. Pressing hard enough to leave a mark that would outlast the paint and almost outlast the rust. Lily appeared from around the south face of the silo. She looked at her mother on the ground. Who called? A woman from South Dakota. She knows the pipe bag. They have a matching piece in their collection. They've been looking for the other one since 1987. Lily was very still. So we found it. Not exactly, Nora said. Clara found it in 1959. It's been here waiting this whole time. The authentication of the paintings took 11 weeks. Paul from the university worked with the methodical patience of a man who understood that accuracy was the whole point and that rushing was not a virtue in this kind of work. Margaret supplemented his analysis with 2 additional specialists for pieces they couldn't fully resolve between them. Infrared reflectography, X-ray imaging, pigment analysis, archival research, cross-referencing with dealer records and estate inventories, and the catalog raisonné entries for each artist in question. The confirmation on the large grant would canvas came on a Wednesday morning in November. Paul called Nora directly, without preamble. The infrared analysis confirms underdrawing consistent with Wood's documented working method. The pigment profile matches his verified palette from this period exactly. The stretcher bars are of a species and manufacture consistent with Iowa craftwork of the early 1930s. He paused. The dealer stamp on the reverse, which we've now cleaned and fully read, corresponds to a Cedar Rapids gallery that represented Wood between 1928 in 1934. I have no doubt about this painting, Nora. This is the canvas listed as lost in the 1933 correspondence. She was standing in the farmhouse kitchen when the call came, the east light coming through the window at the same angle it always came. The pine floors, the same floors Clara had walked every morning of the years she'd spent here building her catalog and writing her letters and trying to figure out how to do what needed doing. I'll tell Margaret, she said. There's more, Paul said. The Benton, the larger of the two. I've been in correspondence with the Benton archives in Kansas City for 3 weeks. They have documentation placing a work of these dimensions in his personal possession as late as 1942, at which point it was sold through a private transaction to a farm buyer in western Kansas whose name matches the seller Clara's catalog records for 1941. The chain is intact. Thank you, Nora said, for the work you've put into this. Paul was quiet for a moment. It's the most important authentication work I've done in 30 years. I should be thanking you for letting me be part of it. She drove back to Tulsa for 3 days in December to deal with what needed dealing with. She refilled Lily's inhaler at the pharmacy on Denver Avenue, paid the outstanding $180. 42, and the pharmacist who'd had to explain twice that they couldn't split the cost looked up from the register and said she'd seen the Star article about the farm. Nora said, yes. She paid for the inhaler and went to the parking lot and sat in the car for a minute, not moving, just sitting with the fact that the same errand she'd put off for 3 weeks because she couldn't afford it was now something she'd driven 400 miles to complete. She went to the Crossroads Diner. Dale was in the back restocking the reach-in cooler when she came in. He had 3 of her old shifts open because Kendra had taken a different job in October. Nora said she wouldn't be coming back. She said it the way you said something you'd known for a while. Dale looked at her for a long moment, and then said, I saw the article about the farm. She said, yes. He said, I should have given you back your shifts in September. She said, yes, you should have. They shook hands, and she left, and it was exactly as conclusive as it needed to be. Bet was in the parking lot of the apartment building when Nora came to pack up the studio, loading garden supplies into her trunk the way she loaded everything, with the steady thoroughness of someone who had plenty of time. She looked at Nora's boxes. Full ones. Griggsville? She said. For now. Bet was quiet. Then, I was looking at the wrong numbers. Yes, Nora said. But that was a reasonable mistake. She meant it. Bet had done the math correctly. The math just hadn't included the cedar room below the north concrete pad, which was the part nobody could have reasonably calculated. She drove back to Kansas 2 days before Christmas in a rental car, because the Civic had developed additional opinions about its own condition during the weeks she'd been gone, and she had paid the towing fee and the impound fee and the mechanic's estimate and left the car behind. The rental was warmer and the heat worked, and Lily fell asleep in the back seat somewhere past Wichita with her field notebook open on her lap, pen still in her hand. The farmhouse was cold when they arrived, but the furnace held. Nora made coffee on the camp stove while it warmed, because she hadn't replaced the camp stove, because it had been there from the first morning and she'd become attached to what it meant. The auction was on a Thursday in February. Nora watched it on a laptop in the farmhouse kitchen, because she hadn't been able to bring herself to go to New York, because the farmhouse was where this had started and it felt right to be here. Lily sat beside her, notebook open, pen ready. The Grantwood canvas was the 7th lot in the evening sale, placed in the position Sotheby's reserved for the work that was the reason for the room. The opening bid was set at $45 million. Nora watched the number move. $47 million. $52 million. $58 million. The bidding slowed in the way it slowed when it approached something real, each increment deliberate, the space between bids stretching as the room calculated and recalculated. $63 million. $68 million. $72 million. The room in New York was the quiet of people making large decisions. $78 million. A pause long enough to have a shape. The auctioneer called it. Nora sat back in her chair. Lily wrote the number in her notebook. Then she wrote it again below the first, in larger numerals, the way she wrote things she wanted to be certain she'd gotten correctly. The full auction results came through the following morning in Margaret's summary email. 18 paintings had gone to the block, the ones with no repatriation questions and clear, unambiguous provenance chains. The total was $163 million and change, of which the wood canvas made up nearly half. The Benton works sold above their estimates. The Curry study exceeded its high estimate by 11%. 5 paintings with more complicated histories had been set aside pending further research. 3 paintings had been donated directly to institutions. 1 to the Nelson Atkins in Kansas City, 1 to the Smithsonian American Art Museum, 1 to a small museum in Cedar Rapids that had been trying to acquire a major grant would work for 20 years. A 4th had gone to a university museum in Iowa with the provision that it remained permanently on public display. The coin sale through a specialist house the previous month had brought $22 million. Total realized, $185 million. Diana had structured the Clara Stokes Foundation with an endowment of $95 million. The foundation's mandate was specific and written that way deliberately. Support repatriation efforts for indigenous cultural objects held in private collections. Fund arts education in rural communities in Kansas and Oklahoma and South Dakota. Maintain the Stokes Farmhouse as a site of historical significance. And provide scholarships for young women pursuing careers in museum work and cultural preservation. Nora's personal share, after taxes and legal fees and Margaret's assessment costs and Diana's considerable time and Deerfield's work and 4 months of collection security, came to just under $47 million. She transferred $1,440 to the Finney County Property Tax Office. She settled the 6 weeks of back rent she still technically owed her former landlord in Tulsa, because it was owed and because she'd been raised to pay what she owed. She funded Lily's college account with enough that the question would never come up. She bought a proper coffee maker and put the camp stove in the cabinet under the sink. That was the extent of her celebration. Aldrich's legal challenge was dismissed in March. Diana's email noted it in 3 sentences. The challenge had been found to lack standing given the completeness of the estate documentation and the absence of any competing claim to the original title. Aldrich's firm had withdrawn from the case 2 weeks before the ruling, having presumably calculated that the collection's future was already determined and the legal costs were no longer proportionate to any result they could achieve. Deerfield replied to Nora's forwarded email with 1 line. I suspected he'd fold once the paintings went to auction. The first repatriation ceremony took place at the farmhouse in April. A delegation of 7 people from the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes of Oklahoma drove up from El Reno in 2 vehicles, arriving in the early morning when the light was still low and the fields around the property were pale green with the first growth of a spring that Harlan Stokes had not lived to see. Nora met them in the farmyard. She had learned something in the months since the press availability about how to stand in a moment that was not primarily hers, how to be present for it without making it about herself. She had learned it partly from Clara's catalog, which was meticulous about the objects and reticent about Clara, which was the right proportion. The items from the Cheyenne and Arapaho portion of Clara's catalog had been laid out on long tables in the farmhouse's main room, each one resting on archival padding, each one with Clara's catalog entry and photographs beside it. The room smelled faintly of cedar from the archival boxes that had transported everything from the chamber. The delegation's cultural director, a man in his 60s named Harvey Echohawk, walked along the table slowly. He didn't speak for a long time. The room was quiet. Lily sat in the corner with her field notebook closed on her lap. She had understood without being asked that this was not a moment for documentation. Harvey Echohawk stopped in front of one of the items midway down the table. A pair of moccasins, fully beaded, Clara's catalog placing them at approximately 1870, condition extraordinary. He looked at Nora. These belong to a woman, he said. The beadwork pattern, the colors, the construction. These are a bride's moccasins. Clara's catalog had not noted that. Nora had not known. Harvey Echohawk looked at them for a long moment without speaking. They were purchased from a general store in Dodge City in 1929, Nora said. Clara's catalog shows her father bought them for $3. He absorbed that. Then he said, someone brought them there. From somewhere. And someone else put them in a cedar room in a Kansas silo, and here they are. He wasn't directing the observation at Nora specifically. He was saying it to the room, to the morning, to whatever presence was in a pair of objects that had traveled from a bride to a general store to an auction to a cedar-lined chamber to this table in 70 years. Clara kept them, Nora said. She bought them at auction in 1959 to prevent them going to a collector who intended to use them as decoration. She spent the rest of her life trying to figure out how to return them correctly and died before she finished figuring it out. Harvey Echohawk turned to look at Nora fully. She could have sold them. Yes, but she didn't. No. He was quiet for a moment. Then, that's the part that's difficult to explain to people who weren't here for this. Not the $3. Not the store. The cedar room. Someone cared enough to build a cedar room and catalog everything in it and write the letters. Yes, that doesn't undo what happened before. He said it clearly, without softening it into something it wasn't. Nothing undoes that. But it's something. Lily came to stand beside Nora at some point during the ceremony, quietly, without drawing attention. She stood with her notebook closed, watching as Harvey Echohawk and the other delegation members moved through the room and handled each item in turn, spoke to one another in voices too low for Nora to hear. Afterward, when the items had been wrapped and prepared for transport, Harvey Echohawk came to find Lily. "I hear you were the one who found the marker," he said. "The handprint on the silo." "I put my hand on the wall," Lily said. "My mom saw what it was." He looked at her steadily. "Sometimes finding something and understanding what you found are different skills. You had both." Lily thought about that with the seriousness she brought to everything. "Clara had both too," she said. "She found all of this and she understood what it meant. She just ran out of time." Harvey Echohawk looked at Lily for a long moment. "You're going to do something important someday," he said. Lily met his eyes. "I already am." Nora's mother called in May. Not about the auction or the foundation or the legal dismissal, though Marlene had read about all of those in the Star's coverage, which had given the story the attention it deserved once the grant was sold. She had sent a text after the auction result ran. "You were right." That was Marlene at her most concise. Nora had saved the text without responding, then thought about it, then responded, "I know." She called in May because she'd been going through a box of her own mother's things she'd been meaning to address for years and had found a photograph at the bottom. Black and white, the edges foxed with age. A young woman, early 20s, standing in a field with the wide, clear sky of flat country behind her. On the back, in handwriting Marlene recognized as her grandmother's, "Clara, summer 1960. "She's the one," Marlene said. "The one who built the catalog." "Yes, she's young. In the picture, she's so young. She was 36 when she died." Marlene was quiet for a while. "Your grandmother never talked about her either," she said finally. "They were cousins somewhere along the line. I knew there was someone named Clara on Harlan's side, but I never knew what she'd done. I don't think anyone did. Nobody knew." "No." Another pause. "I'd like to come to Kansas. I'd like to see the farmhouse. If that's something you'd want." Nora looked out the kitchen window. The north silo in the May light, rust red, enormous, the door on the south face now standing open because there was nothing left inside to seal. "Come in June," she said. "Lily's out of school." "June," Marlene said. "Okay." The farmhouse was Nora's now in the way places became yours after you'd lived in them through a winter. After you'd learned the sound the furnace made when the temperature dropped below 20. After you'd fixed the window in the bedroom where Clara's height marks were, replaced the weather stripping, repainted the front porch because the boards needed it, and because you were going to be here long enough for it to matter. Lily had started at Griggsville Elementary in January. She was, by the school's account, a focused and independent student who asked questions her teachers sometimes had to sit with before answering. Her teacher had written on the February progress report, "Lily approaches every subject with the seriousness of a researcher. It is occasionally challenging and consistently a pleasure." She had started a fourth field notebook. On an evening in early June, Nora stood at the north face of the silo. The sky was going that long Kansas pink that preceded sunset, the light warm and horizontal across the fields, the spring growth full now in the 40 acres around the property. The tenant farmer 4 miles down the county road had taken on the land at a fair rate and was managing it with the care of someone who understood that it had rested long enough and had something to give. The silo was empty, clean. The cedar chamber below had been resealed with a proper engineered hatch because the chamber itself was historically significant and preservation required it. Margaret had arranged the documentation of the space before anything was moved, and that documentation was now part of the Foundation's archive alongside Clara's catalog and Lily's field notebooks. The north face still wore its rust-red surface. The handprint was still there. Clara's left hand at 4 feet off the ground, the index finger pointing down at the earth below it. Lily stood beside Nora. She had her notebook under her arm, the current one, not yet full. The previous 3 were in the Foundation archive under proper preservation conditions. Do you think she knew someone would find it? Lily said. Clara? Nora looked at the handprint. She put it there so someone would. That's different from knowing. Lily thought about that. What? If nobody had come for another 50 years? Nora looked at the rust-red surface, at the hand pressed into it in paint that had become part of the metal. It would still have been there, she said. Waiting. Lily opened the notebook and turned to the drawing she'd made on the first morning they were here, before they'd opened anything, before they'd known. A rough, quick sketch in ballpoint pen of the silo against the flat horizon. Below it, she'd written, "Things can look like they've given up, but they're actually just waiting." She had been 7 3/4 when she wrote that. She looked at the drawing for a moment. Then she looked at the silo. Then she looked at Nora. Mom, we did good, right? Nora looked at the handprint. At the rust-red north wall standing in the summer evening, the Kansas sky going pink and wide behind it. At the index finger pointing down at the ground where the cedar room was, where Clara's catalog had spent 52 years in the dark. She thought about the bride's moccasins going home. The pipe bag found after 36 years of the other half of the pair sitting in Pine Ridge with a note that said a matching piece existed but couldn't be traced. The Grantwood canvas on a wall in a museum in Iowa where anyone could walk in off the street and stand in front of it. The wood painting in Cedar Rapids, the Benton at the Nelson Atkins, the Curry study authenticated and placed. The letters mailed, 52 years late, and what Carolyn Whitehorse had said when she'd finally opened the one Clara had sealed. I read it carefully. Because this is a 52-year-old letter from a woman who was trying to do the right thing and ran out of time. She thought about Lily's field notebooks in the Foundation archive. Primary source documentation of a discovery a 7-year-old had begun recording in the first hour because she had understood from the beginning that documentation was how things survived. She thought about a phone call at 6:47 in the morning. About $83.41. About a sealed silo and a cedar room and a child's painted hand on a cold metal wall and the first line of an inscription that 52 years of rust had not been able to fully erase. We did, she said, and there was still so much to do. That was the thing about inheriting a responsibility rather than a fortune. The fortune had a number. Margaret had given it to her in a cedar room in the first days, and formal appraisal had settled it at $410 million. And from that number the costs and the donations and the foundation endowment and the taxes and the fees could all be subtracted, and what remained was still a number. Finite. Calculable. Nora knew what she had. The responsibility didn't work that way. Clara had spent 3 years trying to get to the end of it and had not gotten there. Harlan had understood the weight of it well enough to seal the door and walk away, which was one response to the weight of a thing. The 5 paintings still in storage were still in conversation, still waiting for the provenance research to conclude or for a claimant to come forward. 2 of Clara's letters had generated responses that opened into further questions rather than answers. That was the nature of it. You made the best decisions you could with what you knew, and you left documentation good enough that whoever came after you could make better ones. Clara had written that in her own introduction. Please do better than holding it in a field. She had been writing to whoever came next. She had not known it would be a waitress from Tulsa with $83 in her account and a 7-year-old daughter who put her hand on every surface she passed. But she had written it to whoever came next, and whoever came next had come. The sun dropped below the western horizon. The pink sky went deep blue at the edges. The north silo went dark, its rust-red surface disappearing into the June evening, the handprint gone to shadow. Lily took Nora's hand. They stood in the farmyard in the early summer dark, the 2 of them. The wind moved through the green field. Above them the Kansas stars came out one by one, and then all at once, the way they did in flat country where nothing stood between you and the sky. Wherever Harlan had been in the 4 minutes of gold light each morning, watching and waiting and not quite ready. This was the thing he had been waiting to give away. Not the land, not the silo, not the cedar room full of what Clara had assembled. The permission, the instruction, the knowledge that someone who watched the light change in parking lots without saying a word could be trusted with a truth that had been sealed in metal and concrete since 1971. Nora had $47 million. She had a farmhouse with wide pine floors and an east window that let in the morning light exactly as it always had. She had a daughter whose field notebooks were in an archive because they were primary source documents. Because an 8-year-old had understood that documentation was how things survived. Because she had pressed her hand against a cold metal wall on a Kansas morning and come away with something to follow. Whatever she was worth, this was the part that wasn't in any number. Clara's handprint was still on the north wall. It would still be there 100 years from now. The rust had incorporated the paint into its surface, made the mark part of the structure, and no weather was going to take it. The index finger still pointed down at the truth underneath. Someone had finally gone and looked. Marlene arrived on a Saturday morning in the second week of June, driving herself the 2 hours west from Wichita in a rental car, because she had not wanted to be collected. Arriving under your own power was something. She stood in the farmhouse kitchen without speaking for a moment. She was 61 and had the bearing of a woman who had formed opinions about most things and was now confronted with a thing she had formed the wrong opinion about. The pine floors, the east window, the camp stove that was still on the counter even though there was a proper coffee maker beside it. She said, "It's bigger than I thought." "I know. Your grandfather never described it as big. He probably never thought about the size of it," Nora said. "He was thinking about other things." Marlene set her overnight bag on the kitchen table and looked at the catalog binders stacked on the shelf above the counter, the ones Nora had left out because they were in regular use rather than in the archive. She didn't reach for them. She just looked. "Clara organized all of this herself," she said. "Yes, by herself. In this house. Over 3 years." "Yes." Marlene looked out the east window at the north silo, visible from where she stood, its rust-red surface catching the morning light. "Your grandfather told me once that Harlan was strange because he never needed anything from anyone." She said it without judgment, just the observation. "I thought he meant it as a criticism. Now I think Harlan was strange for a different reason entirely." Nora poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of her mother. "He wasn't strange," she said. "He was afraid." Marlene picked up the cup. She looked at the catalog binders on the shelf. "I know the difference," she said. Lily came downstairs with her current field notebook and stopped in the kitchen doorway when she saw Marlene. She looked at her grandmother with the measured attention she gave to new people, the assessment that adults sometimes found disconcerting because it was so openly evaluative. Marlene looked back at her with the same expression. "You're taller than your pictures," Marlene said. "You look like my mom," Lily said. "But older." Marlene absorbed that without apparent offense. She looked at Nora. "She's yours," she said. "Yes," Nora said. They went upstairs after coffee, because Nora had learned in the months of living here that the bedroom with Clara's height marks was the thing that made the most people understand what this place was. Not the silo, not the cedar chamber. The pencil marks on the plaster beside the window, the name above them, the dates running from 1942 to 1956. Marlene stood in front of the marks for a long time without speaking. She put her hand in her coat pocket and took out an envelope. She held it, but didn't open it. "I brought something," she said. "I wasn't sure I was going to show it to you. I'm still not sure." Nora waited. "When I found the photograph in my mother's box," Marlene said, "I kept looking through the box afterward. I'd been putting off going through it for 2 years. She had things in there I hadn't seen in a long time." She paused. "There were letters. From Clara?" "From Clara. A bundle of them, tied with kitchen string. 15, maybe 16 letters, running from 1960 to 1970. My mother had kept them in a shoebox at the back of her closet. I never knew they existed." She held out the envelope to Nora. "These are 2 of them," she said. "The ones I thought you should read. The others are personal in a way that I don't think belongs here. But these 2. Nora took the envelope. Inside, 2 letters in Clara's handwriting, the same careful rounded script from the catalog cards, from the height marks on the wall they were standing beside. The first was dated April 1963. "Dear Aunt Ruth, I'm writing because I've been at this long enough now that I think I can describe it properly. You asked me once, years ago, what I thought I was doing out here alone. I didn't have a good answer then. I think I have one now. Father started collecting these things because he believed they had value that nobody else was seeing. He was right about that. But he also collected them the way people collected things in those years, which is to say without asking who had made them or what their making had meant to the people who made them. He bought them at auctions and estate sales and from general stores for almost nothing. And he brought them here, and he kept them, and he thought he was preserving something. He was right about that too, partly. What I've been doing for the last 3 years is trying to understand the difference between preserving something and keeping it. I'm not sure those are the same thing. A thing that's preserved can be returned. A thing that's kept might be gone for good. I'm trying to make sure what we have here is the first kind. I know this doesn't explain why I'm not married, or why I don't come to family gatherings, or why Harlan thinks I'm wasting my life in a farmhouse in Kansas. I can't explain it in a way that would satisfy Harlan. But I thought you might understand, since you always ask the right questions. Nora read it twice. Then she looked up at the height marks on the wall. Clara had been 28 in 1963. The last mark on the wall, the final record of her growth, was 7 years old by then. The second letter was dated November 1970, for months before Clara died. Dear Aunt Ruth, I'm writing because I've almost finished. The catalog is as complete as I can make it. The letters are written. The only thing left is to mail them, and I'm going to do that in the spring when the roads are clear and I can drive into town properly. I want you to know that I don't regret any of it. I know that's not what Harlan thinks. I know what the family thinks, that I've wasted the years I should have spent building an ordinary life. But the ordinary life would have meant leaving this where it was, and I couldn't do that. There's a woman's dress in the cedar room under the north silo. Elk teeth, hundreds of them, sewn by someone whose name I'll never know, sometime around 1890. That woman spent years making that dress, years of her life, to make something extraordinary. And then it ended up in a box in an estate sale in Griggsville, Kansas, in 1959 for $11. $11. And nobody thought that was strange. I thought it was strange. I still think it's strange. And I think if something happens to me, and I've been feeling lately like something might, the strange thing would be if that dress didn't get back to where it belongs. Harlan knows where the chamber is. If anything happens, tell him to look. She did tell him, Marlene said quietly, when Nora had finished reading. My mother wrote Harlan a letter in the spring of 1971, a few weeks after Clara died. She told him to look, because Clara had told her. Nora looked at her mother. He got the letter? He must have. My mother kept a copy. It was in the shoebox. He never looked, Nora said. No. Marlene's voice was even, not judging, not absolving. He got the letter, and he sealed the door, and he sat here for 52 years. She paused. And then he sent you. Nora looked at the last pencil mark on the wall. Clara, 1956, 5 feet 6 inches, the last record of her height before she was grown, and the mark stopped. Did your mother know what was in the chamber? She asked. Clara told her generally that there were things from the collection in there, and that they needed to go back to the people they came from. She didn't know the full scale of it. Nobody knew the full scale of it except Clara. Nora folded the letters carefully and put them back in the envelope. These should be in the archive, she said, with the rest of Clara's documentation. Can I keep them? Marlene nodded. I made copies. She looked at the height marks one more time, at the name written above them in the same hand that had written those letters, the same hand that had pressed in red paint against a cold metal wall in October 1970. She looked at it for a long time. She was trying to tell everyone, Marlene said. She just ran out of people who listened. Carolyn Whitehorse drove down from Pine Ridge in the last week of July with the matching pipe bag in a padded case and Harvey Echohawk in the passenger seat, and they arrived in the mid-morning and came into the farmhouse kitchen and accepted coffee the way everyone accepted coffee in the farmhouse kitchen, which was with both hands around the mug. The pipe bag from the cedar chamber had been in Carolyn's care since the April ceremony. She had transported it back to Pine Ridge where it had been examined, documented, and placed in proper storage. Now she brought it back, briefly, because she and Harvey had agreed that the two pieces of a pair should be together at least once before they lived permanently in the same collection. They laid them on the kitchen table side by side. Nora had not seen the second one before. Carolyn's pipe bag was slightly smaller, the beadwork in the same palette but a different pattern, the mirror and the complement of the one Clara had bought in 1959. Together they were clearly made by the same hands. The same tension in the sinew stitching. The same specific geometry in the bead arrangement at the base. Lily sat across the table and looked at them for a long time without writing in her notebook. Harvey Echohawk watched her. What are you thinking? He asked. Lily looked up. I'm thinking about the person who made them. She made 2 of these, and now they've been apart for 100 years, and this is the first time they're together again. Harvey Echohawk nodded. They were made for sisters, he said. That's the tradition this pattern comes from. You made one for yourself and one for your sister. Carried them on the same journey. Lily looked at the two bags on the table. So they were always supposed to be together. Yes. Carolyn looked at Nora across the table. We're adding a new room to our collection in the fall, she said. A dedicated space for this kind of reunion, pieces that have come back. We're going to call it something in Lakota that translates roughly as things that found their way home. She paused. We'd like to include documentation from Clara's catalog, if you'll allow it. Her entry for item 002. Her note that she bought it to keep it from going to someone who would put it on a wall. Nora said, yes, of course. Carolyn looked at the two bags again. The man who sold her the piece had no idea what it was worth. Not the money. The history of it. The fact that there was another one somewhere. He just knew it was old and had fine beadwork, and he'd gotten it from a box lot in an auction. Clara knew, Nora said. Carolyn looked at her. Yes, Clara knew. After they left, the kitchen felt different. Not empty. Something in the table where the two bags had been together for an hour felt like a presence rather than an absence. Lily sat in her chair for a while and didn't open her notebook. Then she opened it to the last page and wrote something. She wrote for 10 minutes, which was a long time for Lily, who was precise and didn't need many words. When she was done, she read it back to herself, made 2 small changes, and looked at Nora. I finished the notebook, she said. Do you want to read the last entry? Nora sat down across from her. Lily slid the notebook across the table. The last entry was dated July. Lily's handwriting at 8 was slightly larger than it had been at 7, the letters a little more confident. Today, Carolyn and Harvey brought the second pipe bag. I put them side by side on the table, and they were the same and different at the same time, which is what sisters are. Clara bought one of them in 1959 in Griggsville, Kansas, for $11, because the person selling it didn't understand what it was. Clara understood what it was. She put it in a cedar room under a silo and wrote a catalog entry and wrote a letter and spent the rest of her life trying to figure out how to return it correctly. She died before she could do that. Her brother Harlan got a letter telling him to look, and he didn't look. Then he died, and he left the property to my mom, who drove here with $83 and found the handprint and looked. The pipe bags are going to Pine Ridge together. That's what Clara wrote in her letter. This does not belong to us to keep. She was right. It didn't. Now it doesn't have to. I have been thinking about what this whole thing means, and I think it means this. Some things get lost, and then found. Some things get found, and then lost. Again, which is worse. The pipe bags were found in 1959 and almost lost again. Clara kept them from being lost. Then she died, and 52 years went by when they were found but not returned, which is a kind of loss too. Then we came. I think what my mom did was the same as what Clara did, but she finished it. Clara started it, and Harlan was supposed to continue it and didn't, and my mom came at the end and finished what 2 other people started. That is a long time for something to wait to be finished. But it waited. And the cedar room kept it safe while it waited, because Clara built the cedar room to last. I don't know if I'll come back to this notebook once it goes in the archive. Maybe I will, and maybe I won't. But if I do, I want to remember that on this day in July, the 2 pipe bags were on the kitchen table in the farmhouse in Griggsville, Kansas, and they were together, and that was something that hadn't happened in 100 years, and I was there. Lily Callahan. Age 8. July. Nora read it twice without speaking. Then she read the last paragraph a 3rd time. She slid the notebook back across the table. That's good, she said. That's exactly right. Lily closed it. She looked at the cover, the 4th notebook, green like the others, worn at the corners from 4 months of use. Then she set it in the center of the table where the pipe bags had been, in the spot that still felt like something. I'll start the next one tomorrow, she said. On the morning Marlene left, she stood in the farmyard before getting into the rental car and looked at the north silo for a long time. The rust-red surface, the south-faced door standing open, the interior empty, the cedar chamber below sealed under its engineered hatch. She looked at it the way she'd looked at the height marks on the bedroom wall, with the attention of a woman updating a long-held understanding of something. The handprint is on the other side, Nora said, coming to stand beside her. I know. Lily showed me yesterday. They stood in the morning light, which was at the angle it was at in early summer, the low morning gold that lasted longer this time of year than it did in October when Nora had first arrived. The farmyard was quiet. A Say's Phoebe called from the cottonwood tree on the east side, the bird Lily had identified in the first week and had been tracking in her notebook since. Your grandmother, Marlene said. The one you sound like. Yes? She used to say that the people who did things quietly were the ones worth watching. She meant it as a criticism of people who talked too much. Marlene paused. I think she meant something else too, that I didn't understand until now. Nora looked at the north silo. Clara was quiet, she said. Clara was quiet. Harlan was quiet. And this place was quiet for 52 years. Marlene looked at Nora. But quiet isn't the same as nothing. No, Nora said. It's not. The Phoebe called again from the cottonwood. Inside the farmhouse, Lily was probably already at the kitchen table with the new notebook open, documenting the morning. Marlene got in the rental car. She drove down the gravel drive toward the county road, the dust settling behind her in the still summer air, and Nora stood in the farmyard and watched until the car was out of sight. Then she turned and went inside, to the kitchen with the east window and the pine floors and the coffee maker and the camp stove she kept on the counter, because some things you held on to not from habit, but because they had been there from the beginning, and that meant something. She poured a cup and stood at the window. The morning light came through and hit the floor at the angle it always hit, the 4 minutes of gold before it went flat and ordinary. She had seen it every morning since October. She had stopped counting the mornings. The silo stood outside in the light, rust red and enormous and empty, the way things were when they had given up what they were holding. Not abandoned, not lost, just done with what they had been for and standing in the light anyway, because that was what solid things did. Nora drank her coffee. Lily came downstairs with the new notebook already open. Mom, the Phoebe is in the cottonwood again. I think she's nesting. Nora looked at her daughter. Then she looked at the new notebook, the fresh green cover, the first pages not yet filled. Write it down, she said. Lily was already writing. Stories like this remind us that starting over is terrifying, but it is always possible. If you or someone you love is facing a total reset right now, whether from a divorce, a loss, or a financial disaster, you need a plan. Scan the QR code on your screen or click the link below to get the Phoenix Blueprint for just $17. It gives you the exact steps you need to take in the first 48 hours and a 90-day plan to get your independence back. Thank you for watching.